Welcome back to another story on God of Fiction. This time, we're bringing you, What If Harry Claimed the Slytherin and Gryffindor Lordships at age 5 and Fired Dumbledore from Hogwarts? Your likes fuel our creativity. Subscribe and stay tuned. Here's the story. Chapter 1, The Cupboard and the Crown. The cupboard smelled like dust and old shoes and something Vernon had spilled on the floor last Tuesday that nobody had bothered to clean up. Harry didn't mind the smell so much anymore. He'd stopped minding it around the time he'd stopped minding the dark, which was around the time he'd turned 4 and realized that minding things didn't make them go away. He was lying on his back on the thin mattress, knees bent because he'd grown 2 inches since winter and the cupboard hadn't grown at all. Through the slats in the door, he could see the hallway light, golden, warm, the kind of light that belonged to people who lived in actual rooms. Upstairs, Dudley was throwing something. It sounded expensive. Aunt Petunia's voice rose in that particular way that meant she was going to blame Harry for it even though Harry had been locked in the cupboard since 4:30. He pressed his palm flat against the underside of the stairs above him and felt the vibrations of the house. The rumble of the telly. The clatter of dishes. The thud-thud-thud of Dudley coming down the stairs, each step bowing the wood just slightly, sending little showers of dust onto Harry's face. He closed his eyes and thought about nothing, which was the safest thing to think about. The lock clicked from outside. "Out," said Vernon. Harry rolled off the mattress and crawled through the door. Vernon was standing in the hallway with his face the color of raw steak, which was never a good sign but wasn't an unusual one either. Behind him, in the kitchen doorway, Petunia stood with her arms crossed and her lips so thin they'd nearly disappeared. "Dudley's school called," Vernon said. Harry waited. He'd learned that waiting was better than asking. "His teacher says he's falling behind in reading. Says he needs extra help at home." Vernon's mustache twitched. "Petunia and I have been discussing it, and we've decided you're going to help him." Harry blinked. "Me? You can read, can't you? All those books you're always sneaking from the library at school, don't think we haven't noticed." Harry could read. He could read better than anyone in his class, better than some of the kids 2 years above. He'd taught himself, mostly, sitting in the back corner of the school library during lunchtimes when going outside meant giving Dudley and his friends a moving target. He'd started with picture books and moved on to everything else. He didn't know why it came so easily. Things just did, sometimes. Things that shouldn't. "Dudley doesn't want my help," Harry said carefully. "Dudley will do as he's told, and so will you." Harry seriously doubted the first part of that statement but kept that thought where it belonged, which was deep inside his head. "Yes, Uncle Vernon." They sat at the kitchen table after dinner. Harry hadn't gotten dinner, but that was normal enough that his stomach had stopped complaining about it, and Harry opened Dudley's reading primer to the first page. Dudley sat across from him with his arms crossed and his face arranged into an expression of pure, focused hatred. The cat sat on the, "I'm not reading baby books," Dudley said. "It's your book. From your school. You're not my teacher. You're not anything. You're just Harry." Harry looked at the book. He looked at Dudley. He had a brief, vivid fantasy of being somewhere else, anywhere else. And then he said, "Do you want me to read it first and you can follow along?" "I want you to shut up." "Dudders," Petunia called from the sitting room, "just let Harry help you, darling. It'll be over quickly." It was not over quickly. 20 minutes later, Harry had coaxed Dudley through half a page by turning it into a game, covering up words and having Dudley guess them, making funny voices for the cat and the dog. Dudley had almost smiled once, which was the closest they'd ever come to something that wasn't hostility. Harry felt a tiny, tentative spark of something that might have been hope, which was his first mistake, because hope in this house was like bringing a lit match into a room full of gas. Vernon came in to check on them. He saw the open book, Harry pointing at words, Dudley actually looking at the page instead of the wall. "How's he doing?" Vernon asked. "He's doing well," Harry said. "He got elephant all by himself." It was the wrong thing to say. He knew at the moment the words left his mouth, the slight emphasis on well, the quiet pride in his voice that sounded too much like a teacher and not enough like a freak who lived in a cupboard. Vernon's face shifted. Something moved behind his eyes. Think you're clever, do you? No, I think you're better than my son. I was just saying he did a good. Vernon's hand came down on the table hard enough to make the book jump. Dudley flinched. Harry didn't, which was his second mistake, because not flinching made Vernon angrier than flinching did. You listen to me, boy. You are nothing. You are a burden on this family, a waste of space and food, and if you ever, talk about my son like you're some kind of authority, I will make you wish you'd never been born. Harry looked at Vernon Dursley and felt something shift inside his chest. Not anger, exactly. Not sadness. Something deeper than both. Something that had been building for 5 years in the dark of a cupboard, growing in silence, feeding on every skipped meal and every locked door and every time he'd been told he was nothing. I already wish that sometimes, Harry said quietly. He didn't mean it to sound the way it sounded. He was 5. He didn't have the vocabulary to explain the complex, knotted thing inside him, the loneliness, the confusion about why he was here and why nobody wanted him and what he'd done that was so terrible that even his own parents had gone and died rather than keep him. It came out simple and honest and devastating, the way things do when children say them. Vernon went very still. Petunia appeared in the doorway. And Harry felt the thing inside his chest crack open. It started in his fingers, a tingling, like static electricity but deeper, running under his skin, racing up his arms. The lights in the kitchen flickered. The book on the table ruffled its pages as if caught in a wind that wasn't there. Dudley shoved his chair back. Vernon took a step forward, hand raised, mouth opening around words that Harry never heard because the world went white and loud and very, very strange. Every window in the kitchen blew out simultaneously. Not cracked, blew out, glass turning to powder, the frames buckling. The table split down the middle with a sound like a gunshot. The refrigerator slid 3 feet across the linoleum. Vernon was thrown backward into the counter, and Petunia screamed, a real scream, not the performative shrieks she used when Harry accidentally made something float or changed the color of her roses. Harry sat in the middle of it, untouched, his hands flat on the 2 halves of the broken table, and the air around him hummed like a plucked string. Then it stopped. Glass dust settled on every surface like snow. The kitchen light swung on its cord, casting lurching shadows. Vernon was on the floor, bleeding from a small cut on his forehead, staring at Harry with an expression the boy had never seen before. Not anger. Not disgust. Fear. Petunia, Vernon whispered. Get the boy away from me. Petunia didn't move. Petunia. I told you, she said, and her voice was thin and shaking and held something that sounded very old. I told you we should never have taken him. He's just like her. He's just like my sister. Harry looked at his hands. They were glowing, faintly, barely visible, a warm golden light just under the skin, like veins of sunlight. As he watched, the light pulsed and something materialized on his right hand. A ring. Heavy, gold, set with a dark stone that seemed to contain its own private night sky. It fit his finger perfectly, which was impossible because his fingers were 5 years old and very small, and this ring looked like it belonged to a king. The ring was warm. Not hot, warm, the way a hand feels when someone holds it. Harry stared at it and the ring stared back, and something in his head, not a voice exactly, more like a knowing, said home. Vernon scrambled to his feet. Take it off. Harry looked at him. Take that thing off right now, boy, I'm warning you. Vernon reached for Harry's hand, and the ring flashed once, bright as a camera, and Vernon yanked his arm back with a howl. His fingers were red, blistered, as if he'd grabbed a hot stove. You don't touch me, Harry said, and his own voice surprised him, calm, clear, certain. Not the voice of a 5-year-old who lived in a cupboard. The voice of someone who had just realized, for the first time in his life, that he didn't have to be afraid. "You never touch me again." He slid off the chair. His feet crunched on powdered glass. He walked past Vernon, who pressed himself against the counter to avoid contact, and past Petunia, who had gone the color of old milk, and past Dudley, who was hiding behind the sitting-room door and peering out with wide, terrified eyes. Harry opened the front door of number 4, Privet Drive, and stepped outside. It was early evening, the sky going purple at the edges, the streetlights just beginning to flicker on. The air smelled like cut grass and someone's barbecue and the promise of summer. Harry stood on the front step and breathed, and the ring on his finger pulsed again, that warm, knowing pulse, and he felt a pull. Not physical. Directional. Like a compass needle swinging north. He followed it. He walked down Privet Drive and turned left on Wisteria Walk and kept going, his trainers slapping the pavement, his oversized hand-me-down clothes flapping around him. He was 5 years old and alone on the streets of Little Whinging at dusk, and he should have been terrified. He wasn't. The ring was a steady warmth on his hand, and the pull was gentle but certain, and for the first time in his life, something wanted him to go somewhere instead of telling him to stay. He walked for 20 minutes. Then something happened that would have made him scream 2 hours ago but now seemed almost reasonable. The world folded. There was no other word for it. The street in front of him creased like a piece of paper, the pavement and the houses and the darkening sky all bending inward toward a single point, and Harry stepped through the fold and was somewhere else entirely. London. He knew it was London because he'd seen pictures in books, the tall buildings, the red buses, the particular quality of the noise. But this wasn't any London he'd seen in any book. He was standing in a small courtyard behind a pub that looked like it had been built before the concept of building codes. The sign above the door read The Leaky Cauldron, and through the grimy windows he could see people in robes, actual robes, like wizards in the storybooks he'd read in the school library, drinking from tankards and talking and waving their hands in ways that made small sparks trail from their fingertips. The door opened and a stooped, bald man looked out at him. "Merlin's beard, it's a child. You all right there, son? Are you lost?" "No," Harry said. "I don't think so." The man, Tom, he'd learn later, the barkeep, looked at Harry, then looked at Harry's forehead, then looked at Harry's forehead again. His mouth fell open. The tankard he was holding slipped from his fingers and shattered on the ground. "Bless my soul," Tom whispered. "Harry Potter." The name moved through the pub like a lit fuse. Chairs scraped. Voices dropped and then rose. People stood up, craning their necks, pushing toward the door. A woman in emerald robes burst into tears. A small man in a top hat actually fainted. Harry stood in the doorway and felt the ring pulse, and the pull inside him said not here. Further. Keep going. "I need to get to Gringotts," Harry said. He didn't know where the word came from. It just appeared in his mouth, fully formed, the way the ring had appeared on his hand. Tom stared at him, then nodded slowly, as if he was in a dream and had decided to go along with it. "Right. Of course. Right this way, Mr. Potter." Tom led him through the pub, past the reaching hands and the murmured blessings and one very old witch who kept saying, the boy who lived, like a prayer, to a small walled courtyard out the back. Tom pulled out a stick, a wand, Harry's brain supplied, from one of those storybooks, and tapped a sequence of bricks in the wall. The wall opened. Harry looked at Diagon Alley for the first time and felt something in his chest, not the cracking thing from the kitchen, but something warmer, something that expanded instead of breaking. The street was alive. It was color and noise and magic, actual magic, everywhere he looked. Shops with moving window displays, owls circling overhead, a cauldron shop where the cauldrons were stacking themselves, a bookshop where a book in the window was reading itself aloud to a small crowd. The cobblestones under his feet were warm, as if the street itself was heated from below. "Right down the end there," Tom said, pointing. "The big white building. Can't miss it. Gringotts Bank looked like someone had built a temple and then dared anyone to rob it. White marble, bronze doors, and on the doors, an engraving, "Enter, stranger, but take heed of what awaits the sin of greed, for those who take, but do not earn, must pay most dearly in their turn." Harry read the poem and felt it was reasonable. He climbed the steps, they were sized for adults, so it took some effort, and pushed through the doors into the entrance hall. Goblins. He'd read about goblins, in a book of folklore he'd found at the back of the little whinging library. The book had described them as small, ugly, and vicious. The book, Harry decided immediately, had been written by someone who had never actually met a goblin, because the creatures sitting behind the long counter were small, yes, but there was nothing ugly about the sharp intelligence in their dark eyes or the meticulous way they handled the gold and jewels on their scales. They looked, Harry thought, like people who took their jobs very seriously and had no patience for nonsense. He walked up to the nearest open teller. The goblin looked down at him, and his long nose wrinkled. "We do not offer tours for children," the goblin said. "I'm not here for a tour." Harry put his hand on the counter, the hand with the ring, and the goblin's expression changed. It went through several phases in rapid succession: surprise, recognition, disbelief, and something that might have been excitement, though it was hard to tell with goblins. "Where," the goblin said slowly, "did you get that ring?" "It appeared on my hand." "Rings do not simply appear." "This one did." The goblin stared at Harry. Harry stared back. He was 5 years old and 3 feet tall, and his clothes were 3 sizes too big, and he had powdered glass in his hair, and he did not look away. The goblin's mouth twitched. It might have been a smile. "Wait here." The goblin disappeared through a door behind the counter. Harry waited, standing on his toes so he could see over the marble surface, watching the other goblins work. They were fast and precise, their long fingers moving over gold coins and gemstones with the kind of efficiency that suggested they'd been doing this for centuries, which, Harry supposed, they probably had. The goblin returned with another goblin, taller, older, with a silver streak in his dark hair and an air of authority that made the other goblin straighten slightly as he passed. "I am Director Ragnarok," the tall goblin said, looking down at Harry with an unreadable expression. "You are Harry Potter." "Yes, sir." The "sir" landed. Harry saw it, a micro-shift in Ragnarok's posture, a fractional raising of the eyebrows. Goblins, Harry would learn, were not accustomed to being called "sir" by wizards of any age. "Come with me, Mr. Potter." They went through the door behind the counter, down a stone corridor lit by floating lanterns, and into an office that was smaller and more functional than Harry had expected. No gold on the walls, no jewels on the desk. Just stone and wood and a large chair behind a large desk, with 2 smaller chairs in front of it. Ragnarok sat behind the desk. Another goblin, younger, sharper-featured, with a slight chip on one of his pointed teeth, appeared from a side door and took a position standing to Ragnarok's left. "This is Griphook," Ragnarok said. "He manages the Potter accounts." "Hello, Griphook," Harry said. Another micro-shift. Griphook inclined his head. "Mr. Potter." Ragnarok folded his hands on the desk. "I am going to ask you a series of questions, and I need you to answer them honestly. Can you do that?" "Yes." "How did you come to be here tonight?" Harry told him. "All of it. The cupboard. The reading lesson. Vernon. The windows. The ring. The fold in the world. Diagon Alley." He told it simply and directly, without self-pity, because he was 5 and didn't yet know that his story was one that warranted pity. He was just telling the truth. When he finished, Ragnarok was very still. Griphook's hands were clenched at his sides. "You live in a cupboard," Ragnarok said. "Under the stairs, yes. And you are not fed regularly." "I eat at school. And sometimes Aunt Petunia gives me toast." Ragnock and Griphook exchanged a look that Harry couldn't read but that contained, if he'd been old enough to identify it, a cold and precise fury. "Mr. Potter, the ring on your finger is the lordship ring of the ancient and most noble house of Gryffindor. It has not appeared on a living hand in over 300 years. It chose you, which means the Gryffindor bloodline magic recognizes you as its rightful heir." Harry looked at the ring. The dark stone seemed to swirl. "Why?" "The Potter family descends from the Peverell line, which intermarried with the Gryffindor line in the 14th century. The lordship has been dormant, waiting for an heir worthy of activation. It seems your magic decided you were worthy tonight." Ragnock paused. "There is more. Okay. With your permission, I would like to conduct an inheritance test. A few drops of blood on a charmed parchment. It will reveal all titles, properties, and vaults to which you are entitled." Harry considered this. He was 5, but he was a very particular kind of 5, the kind that had learned to read alone, to think before speaking, to watch adults carefully and figure out what they actually meant instead of what they actually said. He looked at Ragnock and saw someone who was being straight with him. It was such an unfamiliar experience that it took him a moment to recognize it. "Will it hurt?" "A small prick on your finger. Nothing more." "All right." Griphook produced a piece of parchment, thick, cream-colored, old, and a small silver knife. He held out the knife, handle first. "You must do it yourself," Griphook said. "The magic requires voluntary blood." Harry took the knife, pricked his thumb, and let 3 drops of blood fall onto the parchment. The blood hit the surface and began to move, spreading outward in thin lines, forming words in an elegant script that wrote itself across the page. Ragnock and Griphook read it. Then they read it again. Then Ragnock leaned back in his chair and said something in gobbledygook that Harry didn't understand but that made Griphook's eyes go wide. "What does it say?" Harry asked. Ragnock turned the parchment around so Harry could see. Inheritance test, Harry James Potter born, July 31, 1980 father, James Charles Potter, deceased, mother, Lily Jane Potter née Evans, deceased, titles and lordships, Lord of the ancient and most noble house of Potter, by blood, patrilineal descent, Lord of the ancient and most noble house of Peverell, by blood, patrilineal descent through Potter line. Lord of the most ancient and noble house of Gryffindor, by blood, Peverell Gryffindor intermarriage, activated by lordship ring, Lord of the most ancient and noble house of Slytherin, by right of conquest, defeat of Tom Marvolo Riddle, October 31, 1981, Harry read it twice, sounding out the longer words silently. What's right of conquest? When a wizard defeats another wizard in magical combat, or in your case, survives a killing curse that destroyed the attacker, the victor claims the magical rights of the vanquished. Tom Riddle, the Dark Lord who murdered your parents, was the last living heir of Salazar Slytherin. When you survived his curse and his body was destroyed, his claim transferred to you. The man who killed my parents. Yes. Harry touched the scar on his forehead, the lightning bolt he'd always had, the one Aunt Petunia said he'd gotten in the car crash that killed his parents. It wasn't a car crash. No, Mr. Potter. It was not. Harry sat with that for a moment. The room was quiet. The lanterns flickered. Somewhere deep below the bank, Harry could hear the faint rumble of carts on tracks. What does it mean? He asked. Being lord of all these houses? It means, Ragnock said, and now his voice had a weight to it, a gravity that hadn't been there before, that you are one of the most powerful individuals in magical Britain. Politically. Financially. Institutionally. Each lordship carries a seat on the Wisengamot, the Wizarding High Court and Parliament. The Potter and Peverell seats have been held in trust, illegally, I might add, by Albus Dumbledore since your parents' death. The Gryffindor and Slytherin seats have been vacant for centuries. Who's Albus Dumbledore? The question hung in the air. Griphook made a sound that was almost a laugh. Albus Dumbledore, Ragnock said carefully, is the current headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, chief warlock of the Wizengamot, and supreme mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards. He is widely considered the most powerful wizard alive. He is also the man who placed you with the Dursleys. The room got very quiet. He put me there, Harry said. He did. He knew about the cupboard. Ragnar's jaw tightened. I cannot say with certainty what he knew. I can tell you that he was named your magical guardian in your parents' will, over their explicit objection. There was stated that you were never, under any circumstances, to be placed with the Dursleys. We have the document on file. My parents didn't want me there. No. They listed several preferred guardians. Sirius Black, your godfather. Alice and Frank Longbottom. Minerva McGonagall. Remus Lupin. None of them were contacted. Dumbledore overrode the will using his authority as chief warlock and placed you with your mother's sister, citing blood protection wards. Harry was 5 years old. He did not fully understand all of this. But he understood the shape of it, the outline, the shadow it cast. Someone powerful had decided where Harry should live, had ignored what Harry's parents wanted, had put Harry in a cupboard under the stairs in a house where nobody loved him. You said he's been using my seats, Harry said. On the Wizengamot. Wizengamot. Yes. He has voted on your behalf for 4 years without legal authorization. He has also authorized withdrawals from your trust vault, ostensibly for your care. How much? Griphook stepped forward with a ledger, already open. 50,000 galleons per year, paid to the Dursleys for your upkeep. He paused. Roughly £250,000 in Muggle currency. Per year. The Dursleys had been paid £250,000 a year to keep Harry in a cupboard and feed him toast. Harry looked at the ledger. He looked at the numbers. He couldn't do the math exactly, he was 5, but he understood enough. He understood that the Dursleys had new cars and expensive holidays and Dudley had a bedroom full of toys, and Harry slept on a mattress in a cupboard. I want it back, Harry said. We can arrange that. And I want to claim my seats. All of them. Ragnar studied him. You are 5 years old, Mr. Potter. Is there an age requirement? The goblin blinked. He looked at Griphook. Griphook looked back, and this time, his expression was unmistakably a grin, sharp and thin and full of teeth. No, Ragnar said slowly. There is not. Wizarding law is remarkably clear on this point. A lord is a lord regardless of age, provided the family magic has accepted them. The ring on your finger is proof of that acceptance. Then I'm claiming them. All 4 seats. All 4. You understand that this will make you the single most powerful voting bloc in the Wizengamot? 4 seats, 2 of which are founder seats with enhanced voting weight. I understand that nobody's going to put me in a cupboard again, Harry said. Ragnar looked at this child, skinny, bruised, wearing clothes that could have fit 2 of him, with glass dust in his hair and a ring on his finger that hadn't been worn since the Middle Ages, and something in the old goblin's face changed. It was subtle. If you didn't know goblins, you might have missed it. The hardness around his eyes softened, just slightly, and his chin dipped in something that was not a bow but was adjacent to one. Griphook, Ragnar said. Prepare the lordship acceptance rituals. All 4 houses. And bring the full Potter account ledger, every transaction since October 31st, 1981. At once, Director. And Griphook? Sir. Contact our legal division. I want a full audit of every action taken by Albus Dumbledore in relation to the Potter estate. Every canute withdrawn, every vote cast, every document signed. Griphook's grin widened. With great pleasure, Director. The acceptance ritual was simple and ancient. 4 stone pedestals were brought into a ceremonial chamber deep below the bank, a round room carved from living rock, with no lanterns, the light coming from veins of crystal that ran through the walls like luminous roots. On each pedestal sat a ring. The Potter ring, gold, set with a ruby, engraved with a stag. The Peveril ring, silver, set with a black stone marked with a strange triangular symbol. The Gryffindor ring, this one flew from Harry's hand and settled on its pedestal, glowing, was gold and crimson, set with a deep red stone that burned like an ember. A roaring lion was etched into the band. The Slytherin ring was silver and green, set with an emerald so dark it was almost black. A serpent ate its own tail around the band. When Harry approached it, the ring hissed. Harry hissed back. Everyone in the room froze. Harry looked up at Ragnock and Griphook, who were staring at him with identical expressions of shock. "What?" Harry said. "You speak Parseltongue," Griphook said. "The language of snakes. I spoke to a garden snake once at the Dursleys. It was very polite." Ragnock covered his mouth with his hand. His shoulders shook slightly. If Harry hadn't known better, he'd have thought the director of Gringotts was trying not to laugh. Harry placed his hand on the Potter ring first. It slid onto his finger and warmth spread up his arm, the warmth of a fireplace, of a blanket, of someone ruffling his hair. A voice whispered, not in his ears but in his blood, "Welcome home, son of Potters." The Peveril ring was colder. It settled on his finger like a promise, and the voice that came with it was older, deeper, tinged with something that might have been the grave. "You carry our line. Death is not your master." The Gryffindor ring roared. There was no other word for it. When it touched his skin, Harry heard a lion's roar echo through the chamber, felt it in his ribs, in his teeth. The crystal veins in the walls flared crimson. "Courage, young lion. The brave do not kneel." The Slytherin ring was last. Harry picked it up and it coiled, the metal actually moved, the serpent uncoiling and tasting the air with a silver tongue, and when it slid onto his finger, the voice that spoke was cool, precise, and faintly amused. "So. The conqueror is a child. How delightful. Welcome, heir of my heir's destroyer. Use my power well, or it will use you." "I'll manage," Harry told the ring. The four rings pulsed once in unison, and then they merged, flowing together on Harry's right hand, combining into a single ring that contained elements of all four. Gold and silver twisted together. The stone shifted between red and green and black, never settling. The engravings moved, lion, serpent, stag, and the Peveril symbol chasing each other around the band. The magic that flooded through Harry was enormous. It didn't hurt, it felt like jumping into a lake on a hot day, that shock of sensation followed by exhilaration. His skin glowed. His eyes, Lily Potter's green eyes, blazed like emeralds held up to the sun. The glass dust burned out of his hair in tiny sparks. His clothes, the baggy, stained, second-hand ruins of Dudley's cast-offs, transfigured themselves, the fabric tightened, darkened, reshaped into simple black robes trimmed with gold and silver. Harry Potter stood in the ceremonial chamber of Gringotts Bank, 5 years old, orphan, cupboard-dweller, and he held the power of 4 ancient houses in his blood and on his hand, and he felt, for the first time in his life, whole. "Well," he said, looking down at himself, "that's better." Griphook led him back to Ragnock's office. The walk was different this time. Every goblin they passed stopped what they were doing and stared. Several bowed. One dropped a bag of gold and didn't even pick it up. "They can feel it," Griphook said, without being asked. "The lordship magic. You carry the weight of 4 houses. The ambient magical signature is considerable. Is that bad? For you? No. For anyone who plans to cross you?" Griphook showed his teeth. "Very." Back in the office, Ragnock had spread a series of documents across his desk. The Potter account ledger was open, and the pages were dense with entries. "While you were in the chamber, I had our auditors run a preliminary analysis," Ragnock said. "The results are concerning." "How concerning?" "Albus Dumbledore has withdrawn a total of 200,000 galleons from your trust vault over the past 4 years. He has authorized the use of Potter properties without your consent. Your family's ancestral home, Potter Manor, is currently being used as a safe house by an organization called the Order of the Phoenix, which Dumbledore runs. He has sealed your parents' will, preventing its execution. He has blocked all attempts by other parties to contact you or check on your welfare. And he has cast at least 3 monitoring charms on your person. We detected them when you entered the bank. They were keyed to him. Monitoring charms. Spells that allow him to track your location and your emotional state. They were placed on you as an infant. Harry processed this. The ring on his finger pulsed steadily, and he realized he could feel the charms now, faint, like cobwebs clinging to his skin. He reached for them with that new part of himself, the part that had woken up in the Dursleys' kitchen, and he pulled. The charms shattered. 3 tiny silver threads materialized in the air, glowing briefly, and then dissolved into nothing. Somewhere far away, though Harry didn't know this, an array of silver instruments in a tower office at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry suddenly stopped spinning, went dark, and crumbled to dust. An old man in half-moon spectacles looked up from a lemon drop and felt, for the first time in a very long time, genuine alarm. "Done," Harry said. Ragnar's eyebrows rose. "You broke monitoring charms placed by Albus Dumbledore. They were on me without my permission." "Indeed they were." Ragnar picked up a quill. "Mr. Potter, Lord Potter, I should say, or Lord Gryffindor, or Lord Slytherin, or Lord Peveril, we have much to discuss. But it is late, and you are young, and there is one thing that must be settled before anything else." "What's that?" "Where you will sleep tonight." Ragnar set down the quill. "You will not be returning to the Dursleys. That much is certain. As your account manager and, if you will allow it, your financial guardian, I can offer you a suite of rooms here at Gringotts until more permanent arrangements are made. You will be safe. You will be fed. You will be comfortable." Harry opened his mouth and, to his absolute mortification, his voice cracked. Not from sadness, but from something larger and more unmanageable, the sudden, stunning novelty of being offered safety by someone who meant it. "Thank you," he said. "Yes. I'd like that." Griphook led him to the guest quarters, a suite of rooms carved into the rock below the bank, furnished simply but beautifully, with a bed that was bigger than the cupboard and softer than anything Harry had ever touched. There was a bathroom with hot water. There was a sitting room with a fireplace. There was food on the table, roast chicken, potatoes, bread, butter, fruit, and a chocolate cake that was almost offensively large for one person. Harry ate until he couldn't eat any more, which didn't take long because his stomach was small and unused to abundance. Then he washed his face and his hands and climbed into the bed. He lay in the dark, real dark, warm dark, dark without the sound of Vernon's snoring or the vibration of Dudley's footsteps overhead, and he looked at the ring on his hand. It glowed faintly, a gentle pulse that matched his heartbeat. "I don't know what I'm doing," he whispered. The ring pulsed. The knowing rose in him, the same feeling that had guided him from Privet Drive to Diagon Alley to Gringotts, not a voice, not words, just direction. "You'll learn." Harry closed his eyes. He slept without nightmares for the first time in memory. Morning came differently underground, no light through curtains, no alarm clocks. Just a gentle warming of the crystal veins in the walls, the stone itself responding to Harry's waking. He lay in bed for 10 minutes simply because he could, because nobody was banging on the door and shouting at him to get up and make breakfast. Then he got up, because there was work to do. Griphook was waiting outside with a fresh set of robes, still black, still trimmed with gold and silver, but sized properly this time, tailored by goblin hands overnight. Harry dressed and followed Griphook to Ragnar's office, where the director was waiting behind a desk now completely covered in parchment. "Good morning, Lord Potter." "Good morning, Director Ragnar. And please just call me Harry." Another of those micro-shifts. A warmth entering Ragnar's voice that hadn't been there the night before. "Very well. Harry. We have a great deal to cover. Are you ready? Harry climbed into the chair across from Ragnar. His feet didn't touch the ground. He folded his hands in his lap and looked at the director of Gringotts and said, "Let's start." They worked through the morning. Ragnar explained the Wizengamot, its structure, its factions, its key players. He explained the Hogwarts Board of Governors, 12 members, appointed by the ministry and the founding families, responsible for overseeing the school. He explained that the 4 founders had built oversight into Hogwarts' charter, each founder's heir held a permanent seat on the board, and any 2 founders acting in concert could override any decision, hire or fire any staff member, and alter the school's charter. You hold 2 founder seats, Ragnar said. Gryffindor and Slytherin. Which means you, alone, have absolute authority over Hogwarts. Harry let that settle. Over the school. Over everything. The curriculum, the staffing, the wards, the grounds. Hogwarts is, at its core, a private institution owned by the founders and their heirs. The ministry has oversight in certain areas, but the founders' charter supersedes ministry authority in all matters of school governance. So I could fire the headmaster. You could fire the headmaster, hire a new one, restructure every class, and redecorate the Great Hall in polka dots if you wished. Harry almost smiled. Almost. I don't care about polka dots. But I do want to know what Dumbledore's been doing with my school. My school. The words came out naturally, without arrogance. The same way you'd say, my home, or, my name. Not possessive. Factual. As a matter of fact, Ragnar said, I have just the thing. He slid a thick folder across the desk. A comprehensive report on Hogwarts under Dumbledore's tenure. Our intelligence division compiled it overnight. Harry opened the folder. Griphook leaned in and began pointing out key passages, translating the more complex language into terms a 5-year-old could grasp. The picture that emerged was not pretty. The defense against the dark arts position had been cursed for decades. No professor lasted more than a year, and Dumbledore had never investigated or addressed the curse. The Forbidden Forest was home to increasingly dangerous creatures that had come perilously close to the student population. The school's infrastructure was deteriorating, moving staircases that malfunctioned, a poltergeist that assaulted students regularly, a giant squid in the lake that nobody was monitoring. Staff salaries hadn't increased in 15 years. The library's dark arts section was restricted but poorly warded, allowing ambitious students easy access. And most recently, Dumbledore had installed a series of elaborate traps on the 3rd-floor corridor, guarding an object so dangerous that its very presence in a school was arguably criminal. What object? Harry asked. The Philosopher's Stone. Created by Nicholas Flamel, it produces the elixir of life and can transmute base metals into gold. Dumbledore moved it to Hogwarts last summer, allegedly to protect it from theft. He put a priceless, dangerous magical artifact in a building full of children. Yes. And the traps protecting it? Include a 3-headed dog, a patch of devil's snare, an enchanted chess set, a room full of flying keys, a troll, a logic puzzle, and the Mirror of Erist. Several of these are potentially lethal. Harry closed the folder. He sat very still for a moment, the ring pulsing on his hand, the magic of 4 houses humming in his blood. He was 5 years old. He had slept in a cupboard for as long as he could remember. He didn't know what most of these magical things were, or how the wizarding government worked, or what the proper way to remove a headmaster was. But he knew what it felt like to be a child in a place where the adults had failed you. He knew that in his bones. I want a Wizengamot session, Harry said. As soon as possible. I can request an emergency session within 48 hours, given the severity of the charges. Do it. And regarding Hogwarts? Harry looked at Ragnar. I want to see it. The school. I want to walk the halls and meet the staff and see this 3rd-floor corridor for myself. That can be arranged. But Harry, Dumbledore will resist. He is not a man accustomed to being challenged, and he is extraordinarily powerful. So am I. He said it simply. No bravado, no chest puffing. Just a statement of fact from a boy sitting in a chair with his feet dangling above the floor. Ragnarok regarded him for a long moment. Then the director of Gringotts reached across the desk and extended his hand. Harry shook it. The goblin's grip was firm and dry and warm. It will be an honor working with you, Lord Potter. Harry. Harry. For the first time, Ragnarok smiled, a real smile, not a diplomatic one, showing teeth that were sharp and white and numerous. Let us begin. Harry spent the rest of the day preparing. Griphook became his shadow, his translator, his tutor, walking him through wizarding customs, political protocols, forms of address. Harry absorbed it at a rate that made Griphook raise his eyebrows repeatedly, which for a goblin was practically a standing ovation. You learn fast, Griphook observed, as Harry correctly identified all 12 current members of the Board of Governors from memory after hearing their names once. I had a lot of time to practice, Harry said. Reading in the cupboard. You learn to remember things when you don't have anyone to remind you. Griphook was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I have a son your age. Harry looked at him. His name is Grindak. He likes rocks. Collects them. Griphook's expression was impossible to read, but his voice was careful, deliberate. If someone put my son in a cupboard, I would tear the world in half. I don't want to tear the world in half, Harry said. I just want it to be fair. Then you are a better person than me, Harry Potter. Harry grinned, and for a moment he looked exactly like what he was, a 5-year-old boy with messy hair and a gap where a baby tooth had fallen out, and then the moment passed and he went back to studying, because the Wizengamot session was in 2 days and he intended to walk in there knowing more than anyone expected. That evening, back in his quarters, Harry sat on the bed and held up his hand. The combined ring shifted colors in the lamplight. I'm going to need help, he said to the empty room. I'm 5. I know I'm smart, but I'm 5, and these people have been doing this for decades. Dumbledore's been doing this for a century. The ring pulsed. The knowing rose. You are not alone. You have the goblins. You have the truth. You have the magic of 4 houses and the blood of heroes and the stubbornness of a boy who taught himself to read in a dark cupboard because he refused to be nothing. That is enough. That has always been enough. Harry nodded slowly. He lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about tomorrow, and the day after, and all the days after that. He thought about a castle in Scotland full of children. He thought about an old man who believed he knew best. He thought about a cupboard under the stairs. Never again. Not for him. Not for anyone. He closed his eyes and the ring glowed softly, and somewhere in the deep stone heart of Gringotts, the goblins worked through the night, sharpening their arguments like blades, because morning was coming and with it, a reckoning. Harry Potter, Lord of 4 houses, heir to 2 founders, 5 years old and fire in his blood, slept deeply and dreamed of lions and serpents running together through fields of gold. The world was not ready for him. That, he thought just before sleep took him, was the world's problem. Chapter 2, The Wolf Among Sheep. The morning of the Wizengamot session, Harry woke up early and couldn't get back to sleep. He lay in the dark of his Gringotts quarters and stared at the ceiling and ran through everything Griphook had taught him over the past 2 days until the words blurred together in his head: protocols, voting procedures, forms of address, parliamentary tricks. He was 5. He shouldn't have been able to retain half of it. But the lordship magic hummed through him constantly now, sharpening his mind the way a whetstone sharpens a blade, and when Griphook quizzed him, the answers came fast and clean. He got up, washed, and dressed. The goblins had made him new robes for the occasion, black silk with the crests of all 4 houses embroidered on the chest in thread that shifted between gold, silver, crimson, and emerald. They fit perfectly. When he looked in the mirror, he didn't see the boy from the cupboard. He saw someone else entirely. He also didn't see a 5-year-old, which was the point. Griphook met him in the corridor with a leather satchel full of documents and an expression of controlled anticipation. "Ready?" "No," Harry said honestly. "Let's go anyway." Griphook's chipped-tooth grin flashed. "That's the spirit." They took a Gringotts cart to the surface. Harry's stomach swooped on the drops, and he laughed in spite of himself, a bright, startled sound that echoed off the tunnel walls. Griphook glanced at him sideways and something in the goblin's face softened. In the main hall, Director Ragnarok was waiting with an escort, 4 goblin warriors in ceremonial armor, carrying axes that were definitely not ceremonial. They fell into formation around Harry without a word, 2 in front, 2 behind, and the group marched through the bronze doors of Gringotts into the pale morning light of Diagon Alley. People stared. Of course they did. A 5-year-old boy flanked by armored goblins, walking down the cobblestones with his chin up and his robes billowing, the ring on his hand catching the light with every step. Whispers broke out like brushfire. Harry heard his name hissed from mouth to mouth, saw people pointing, saw a woman press her hand to her heart. He ignored all of it. Eyes forward. 1 foot in front of the other. The ring pulsed steady as a heartbeat. They fled to the ministry from the leaky cauldron. Tom the barkeep nearly fell over himself to offer them use of his fireplace, and Harry managed the Fleur network on his first try, stepping out of the green flames in the ministry atrium without stumbling, without coughing, without a single fleck of ash on his robes. The lordship magic, he was discovering, had opinions about dignity. The Ministry of Magic was enormous. The atrium alone could have swallowed the Dursleys' house several times over, a vast, echoing space of dark wood and polished stone, with a ceiling enchanted to show the sky and a fountain in the center depicting a witch, a wizard, a goblin, a centaur, and a house elf arranged in a way that made Griphook's lip curl. "Note the positioning," Griphook murmured. "The witch and wizard on top. Everyone else beneath." Harry noted it. Filed it away. The lifts took them to level 10, the Wizengamot chambers. The corridor outside was already crowded, witches and wizards in plum-colored robes milling about, talking in low, urgent voices. The emergency session had drawn a full house. Word had leaked, as word always does, and the rumors were flying. Harry Potter was alive, Harry Potter had surfaced at Gringotts, Harry Potter was claiming lordships, Harry Potter was 5 years old. The crowd parted as Harry's group approached. The goblin warriors helped with that. Something about the axes discouraged loitering. But it was Harry they were looking at. Harry they couldn't stop looking at. Some with wonder, some with suspicion, some with a naked, calculating hunger that Griphook had warned him about. "They'll try to use you," Griphook had said. "Every faction, every house, every petty political schemer with a seat on that council. They'll see a child and think opportunity." "Good," Harry had replied. "Let them underestimate me. It's cheaper than a surprise." That had earned him one of Griphook's rare, barking laughs. At the doors to the chamber, a witch in ministry robes, young, nervous, clutching a clipboard, stepped into their path. "I'm sorry, this session is restricted to Wizengamot members and their Lord Harry James Potter," Griphook said, his voice cutting through the ambient noise like a blade. "Head of the ancient and most noble houses of Potter, Peveril, Gryffindor, and Slytherin. Holder of 4 Wizengamot seats. This is his escort." The witch looked at Harry. Looked at the ring. Looked at Griphook. Looked at the goblin warriors and their very real, very sharp axes. She stepped aside so fast she dropped her clipboard. Harry walked into the Wizengamot chamber. It was a round room, tiered like an amphitheater, with concentric rings of seats rising toward the ceiling. Each seat had a nameplate, a crest, and a small desk for documents. At the center of the lowest tier sat the chief warlock's chair, larger than the others, ornate, positioned so that its occupant could see and be seen by everyone in the room. That chair was currently occupied by Albus Dumbledore. Harry saw him and felt the ring flare hot against his skin. The old man was exactly as the books in Gringotts' library had described, tall, thin, silver-bearded, with half-moon spectacles and robes of midnight blue covered in silver stars. He looked like a kindly grandfather. He looked like the illustration on the cover of a storybook. He looked like someone you would trust with your life. Harry's parents had trusted him with their son's life. Harry had gotten a cupboard. Dumbledore's eyes found Harry the moment he entered. They were blue and bright, and they widened, just slightly, just for a moment, before his expression smoothed into something warm and twinkling. "Ah," Dumbledore said, and his voice carried through the chamber with the ease of someone accustomed to commanding attention. "Harry, my boy. What a wonderful surprise." Harry stopped in the center of the chamber floor. The goblin warriors fanned out behind him. Griphook stood at his right shoulder with the satchel of documents. 300 pairs of eyes watched. "Lord Potter," Harry said. "Or Lord Gryffindor. Or Lord Slytherin. Or Lord Peverell. Whichever you prefer, Chief Warlock. But not Harry. And certainly not, my boy. We haven't met." The silence that fell was the kind that has weight. Dumbledore's twinkle dimmed. Not gone, the man was too practiced for that, but dimmed, the way a lamp dims when someone turns the knob. "Of course. My apologies, Lord Potter. I meant no offense. None taken. I'm here to claim my seats." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Harry saw heads turning, saw whispered conversations behind raised hands, saw the quick, sharp glances of political animals scenting blood in the water. A wizard in the third row, heavy-set, ruddy-faced, with a walrus mustache that rivaled Vernon Dursley's, stood up. "Point of order, Chief Warlock. An emergency session was called, and I'd very much like to know what the emergency is. We were told it involved the Potter estate." "It involves considerably more than that, Lord Ogden," Griphook said, stepping forward with a sheaf of parchment. "If the Wizengamot will permit, I will present the matter formally." "Goblins do not address the Wizengamot," said a cold voice from the upper tier. Harry looked up and saw a man with white blonde hair and grey eyes and a face that looked like it had been carved from expensive soap. Lucius Malfoy. Griphook had shown Harry his file. Old money, old blood, old prejudices. Former Death Eater who'd bought his way out of prison. "This goblin is my legal representative," Harry said, "and he will address whoever I need him to address. Unless there's a law against it." Malfoy's mouth opened. Closed. His eyes flicked to Dumbledore, seeking support. "There is, in fact, no such law," said a witch in the second row, square-jawed, monocled, with an air of brisk competence. Amelia Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Harry had memorized her file too. Honest. Fair. Dangerous when crossed. Goblin representatives have addressed this body 17 times in the last century, most recently in 1973. Lord Malfoy's objection has no legal basis. "Thank you, Madam Bones," Harry said. Bones looked at him. Her monocle magnified one eye to comical proportions, giving her an expression of perpetual intensity. She studied Harry for a long moment, then inclined her head. "Proceed, Lord Potter." Harry nodded to Griphook. The goblin opened the satchel and began. He was methodical. Devastating. Each point was laid out with the precision of a surgeon and backed by documentation, copies distributed to every seat by enchanted parchment that flew through the air like oversized butterflies. First, Harry's inheritance. The blood test results, certified by Gringotts, confirming his claim to 4 lordships. The Potter and Peverell lines by blood. The Gryffindor line by blood through the Peverell-Gryffindor intermarriage. The Slytherin line by right of conquest. Gasps at that one, actual gasps, the theatrical kind that Harry thought only happened in plays. Second, the financial irregularities. 200,000 galleons withdrawn from the Potter Trust Vault by Albus Dumbledore, ostensibly for Harry's care. Corresponding Muggle bank records showing payments to the Dursleys. Harry's living conditions at the Dursleys described in clinical, unflinching detail: the cupboard, the malnutrition, the hand-me-down clothes, the physical intimidation. The chamber went very quiet during this part. Harry kept his eyes forward. He didn't look at Dumbledore. Third, the will. James and Lily Potter's last will and testament, sealed by the Chief Warlock's office and never executed. The will's explicit instruction that Harry was never to be placed with the Dursleys. The list of preferred guardians, none of whom had been contacted. Fourth, the monitoring charms. 3 charms placed on Harry as an infant, keyed to Dumbledore's magical signature, tracking his location and emotional state. No legal authorization. No guardian's consent. Surveillance of a minor by a public official without due process. Griphook finished. The enchanted parchment settled on desks throughout the chamber like leaves after a storm. The silence was absolute. Then everyone started talking at once. Dumbledore raised his hand. The noise subsided, not instantly, but with the grudging deference of people who were angry but still, despite everything, habituated to his authority. "These are serious allegations," Dumbledore said. His voice was calm. Measured. The voice of a man who had weathered 1,000 storms and expected to weather 1,000 more. "And I will address them. But first, I must express my concern for young Harry, Lord Potter, himself." He turned those blue eyes on Harry, and they were full of warmth, of grandfatherly concern, of the particular kind of care that makes you feel small and protected and grateful. "My boy, Lord Potter, you have clearly been through a great deal. The discovery of one's heritage can be overwhelming, especially for someone so young. I want you to know that everything I did to protect you." Harry looked at Albus Dumbledore and felt the ring burn on his finger and said, "Protect me from what, exactly?" "There are forces in this world, dark forces, that would do you harm. Your parents gave their lives to protect you, and the blood wards at your relative's home, the blood wards at my relative's home protected me from dark wizards," Harry said. "They did not protect me from my relatives." Was that intentional? A sharp intake of breath from somewhere in the chamber. "I assure you, I was not aware of the specifics of your living conditions, Arabella Figg," Harry said. Dumbledore stopped. "She lives on Wisteria Walk, 2 streets from Privet Drive," Harry continued. Griphook had found her in the files, a squib, a member of Dumbledore's Order of the Phoenix, placed in Little Whinging to watch Harry. "She babysat me 11 times in 4 years. She saw my clothes. She saw how thin I was. She reported to you." Harry paused. "You were aware?" Dumbledore's expression didn't change. That was impressive, in its way. Most people, caught in a lie in front of 300 witnesses, would flinch or flush or stammer. Dumbledore simply absorbed it, the way a stone absorbs rain. "Mrs. Figg reported that you were not well treated," he said quietly. "But the blood wards were essential. The protection they offered, cost me my childhood. Are you going to tell me it was worth it, Chief Warlock? Because I'm asking genuinely. I'd like to hear you explain to this body why a baby's safety from hypothetical dark wizards required that baby to sleep in a cupboard." The chamber erupted. Augusta Longbottom was on her feet, a tall, formidable witch in a vulture-topped hat who looked like she could stare down a dragon and win. "Chief Warlock, if even half of what has been presented is accurate, this constitutes criminal negligence of a minor. I move for an immediate investigation by the DMLE." "Seconded," said Amelia Bones. "I object," Lucius Malfoy began. "On what grounds?" Bones snapped. Malfoy hesitated. He'd been planning to object on principle, opposing anything Bones supported was practically a reflex, but even he could read the room. 300 faces, and not one of them sympathetic to the man who'd put the boy who lived in a cupboard. Malfoy sat down. "The motion carries," said the session clerk, a thin wizard who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. "DMLE investigation into the placement of Harry Potter, authorized." Harry waited for the noise to subside, then said, "There's more." More. The word landed like a stone in a pond. "I hold 4 Wisengamot seats," Harry said. 2 of which, Gryffindor and Slytherin, are founder seats. I am formally reclaiming all 4 from the trusteeship of the Chief Warlock, effective immediately. All votes cast on my behalf by Albus Dumbledore over the past 4 years are to be reviewed for legitimacy. I am also requesting a full financial audit of my estates by Gringotts, the results of which will be shared with the DMLE. He reached into the satchel Griphook held open and produced a final document, thick, bound in leather, sealed with the Hogwarts crest. "Finally," Harry said, "I am invoking my rights as holder of 2 founder seats on the Hogwarts Board of Governors. Under the original founder's charter, 2 founder heirs acting in concert have ultimate authority over the school. As I hold both the Gryffindor and Slytherin seats, I am exercising that authority to call for a formal review of Hogwarts operations, staffing, and safety protocols." He set the document on the session clerk's desk. "I will be visiting Hogwarts within the week to conduct this review personally." The chamber was so quiet Harry could hear the enchanted ceiling humming overhead. Then Lucius Malfoy stood again, and this time his expression was different. The cold disdain was still there, but layered over it was something else: interest, calculation, the subtle hunger of a man who sees an opportunity. He smoothed his robes and smiled down at Harry with the practiced warmth of someone who has never been warm in his life. "Lord Potter," Malfoy said, and his voice was silk. "I must say, I am deeply impressed. The wizarding world has long awaited your return, and it seems the wait was worthwhile. If I may be so bold, the Malfoy family has a long history of supporting promising young lords. I would be honored to offer my guidance as you navigate these complex political waters." Harry looked up at Lucius Malfoy. He let the silence stretch for 3 seconds. Then 4. "Lord Malfoy," Harry said. "You were a follower of the man who murdered my parents." The silk smile froze. "You claimed the Imperius curse," Harry continued. "Gringotts records indicate you paid 50,000 galleons to the minister's discretionary fund in the months following your trial. You also hold a seat on the Hogwarts Board of Governors, where you have blocked funding increases for Muggle-born scholarship programs 7 times in the past 4 years. Harry tilted his head. "Did I miss anything, Griphook?" "His wife's maiden name is Black," Griphook offered helpfully. "The family has a documented history of dark magic going back 12 generations. "Thank you." Malfoy's face had gone the color of old parchment. His hands gripped the railing in front of his seat, knuckles white. "I don't need your guidance, Lord Malfoy," Harry said. "I need your honesty. And since you haven't offered that, I'll settle for your silence." A witch in the 4th row coughed to cover a laugh. Someone else didn't bother covering theirs. Malfoy sat down as if his strings had been cut, and his grey eyes burned with a cold fury that Harry noted and dismissed. Let him be angry. Angry opponents make mistakes. "Are there any other matters for the emergency session?" the clerk asked, his voice strained. "I have one more," Harry said. "A personal request." The chamber waited. "I'd like the Wisengamot to appoint an independent magical guardian for me. Not Albus Dumbledore." Harry looked up at the tiers of seats, scanning the faces until he found the one he wanted. "I'd like to request Madame Amelia Bones." Bones' monocle actually popped off. She caught it reflexively, pressed it back into place, and stared down at Harry with an expression that cycled through surprise, consideration, and something that looked suspiciously like respect. "Lord Potter," she said, "that's highly irregular. So is putting a toddler in a cupboard, Madame Bones. I'd like a guardian who will actually guard me. Your record at the DMLE suggests you're the right person. But if you prefer not to, I understand." Bones was quiet for a long moment. The chamber held its breath. "I would be honored, Lord Potter," she said. "Harry. Harry." The ghost of a smile. "We'll discuss the details after the session." "Thank you, Madame Bones." Amelia. Harry smiled. It was a real smile, not a political one, not a strategic one, just a 5-year-old boy smiling at someone who'd said yes when she didn't have to. Several members of the Wisengamot later admitted, privately, that the smile was the moment they realized this wasn't a puppet show, there was no one behind the curtain, no goblin conspiracy, no dark magic manipulation. It was just a kid. A very unusual kid with very unusual power, but a kid nonetheless. The session adjourned. Harry walked out of the chamber the same way he'd walked in, head up, back straight, goblin escort in formation. But as he reached the doors, a voice stopped him. Lord Potter. Harry turned. Dumbledore stood behind him, the chamber emptying around them. The old man's expression was different now, the twinkle was gone, replaced by something heavier, something that looked almost like grief. May I speak with you privately? Harry looked at him. Considered. The ring pulsed, not a warning, just awareness. You may speak. But not privately. Griphook stays. Dumbledore's gaze flicked to the goblin, then back to Harry. He nodded, slowly. I owe you an explanation. You owe me more than that. But an explanation is a start. Dumbledore led them to a small anteroom off the main corridor. It was empty, a few chairs, a table, the ministry's standard-issue depressing decor. Harry sat. Griphook stood behind him. Dumbledore remained standing, and for the first time Harry noticed how old the man looked. Not the performative oldness of a wise elder, the actual weariness of someone carrying too much for too long. When your parents were killed, Dumbledore said, I was faced with an impossible choice. Voldemort was gone, but his followers were not. Many were desperate, dangerous, seeking revenge. You were the most famous infant in the wizarding world, the child who had somehow survived the killing curse. You were a target. I understand that, Harry said. The blood wards were real. Your mother's sacrifice created a protection tied to her bloodline, as long as you lived with someone who shared her blood, that protection would hold. Petunia Dursley was the only option. My mother's will said otherwise. Your mother wrote her will before the war ended. The situation changed. The situation changed, so you changed my parents' wishes. Dumbledore closed his eyes briefly. Yes. And the money? Was intended for your care. I trusted the Dursleys to use it appropriately. You trusted the woman my mother specifically said should never raise me to use £250,000 appropriately. Silence. And the monitoring charms? Harry pressed. The ones you put on a baby? What were those for? To ensure your safety. I needed to know you were alive, that the wards were holding, you needed to know my emotional state. That's what the charm tracked. You knew I was miserable, Chief Warlock. You knew, and you left me there. Dumbledore opened his eyes, and Harry saw something in them that made the ring flare, not anger, but the hot, sharp burn of recognition. Dumbledore was not lying. He was telling the truth as he understood it. And that was worse, because it meant he genuinely believed that what he'd done was right. That Harry's suffering was an acceptable price for Harry's safety. That the cupboard was a reasonable trade for the blood wards. I made mistakes, Dumbledore said quietly. I will not pretend otherwise. But everything I did because I believed it was necessary. Voldemort is not truly gone, Harry. He will return. And when he does, you will be at the center of it, whether you choose to be or not. Lord Potter, Harry corrected. Dumbledore flinched. It was small. It was real. You may be right about Voldemort, Harry said. Griphook has briefed me on the theories. Horcruxes, soul fragments, you clearly believe he's out there in some form. Fine. I'll deal with that when it comes. But here's what you need to understand, Chief Warlock. Harry leaned forward, and his eyes, Lily's eyes, green as killing curses, green as emeralds, green as the first leaves of spring, caught the light. You do not get to decide what happens to me. Not anymore. You don't get to place me somewhere and walk away. You don't get to spend my gold and use my name and cast your votes with my seats and tell yourself it's for the greater good. That's over. And if I believe you're making a mistake?" Dumbledore asked, and there was something almost plaintive in his voice, something that in another context might have been touching, the concern of an old man for a young boy. "You are 5 years old, Lord Potter. The political world you've entered is ruthless. The enemies you'll make. I grew up with the Dursleys," Harry said. "I know about enemies." He stood. The chair scraped against the stone floor. Griphook moved to his side. "I'm visiting Hogwarts in 3 days," Harry said. "I expect full access to the school, the staff, and the records. If I find what I think I'm going to find, we'll be having another conversation." "And Chief Warlock?" Dumbledore waited. "The Philosopher's Stone. Get it out of the school before I arrive, or I'll remove it myself." "That is not a request." Harry walked out. Griphook followed. The anteroom door swung shut behind them, and Dumbledore stood alone in the dim light, his hands at his sides, his reflection in the dark window looking every one of his 150 years. The news broke that afternoon. The Daily Prophet had a reporter at the session. Of course they did. Emergency sessions were public record, and the evening edition hit the streets with a headline that could have been seen from space: "Boy who lived claims 4 lordships, Dumbledore accused of financial mismanagement and child neglect." The article was breathless, sensational, and largely accurate, which was a first for the Prophet. It included quotes from Augusta Longbottom: "This is a disgrace. I am demanding a full inquiry. Amelia Bones, the DMLE will investigate thoroughly and without prejudice," and an anonymous Wisengamot member: "The boy is 5 years old. 5. And he just dismantled the Chief Warlock in front of the entire council. I've never seen anything like it." Harry read the article in his quarters at Gringotts, sitting cross-legged on the bed, eating shepherd's pie that a goblin attendant had brought without being asked. The goblins, he was discovering, had decided that feeding Harry was a matter of institutional pride. Every meal was enormous, varied, and appeared at exactly the moment Harry started feeling hungry. "They're going to come after me," Harry said. Griphook, sitting in the armchair by the fireplace with a ledger, looked up. "Who?" "Everyone. Dumbledore. Malfoy. The Ministry. The Prophet." Harry set the paper down. "I just picked a fight with the most powerful wizard in Britain in front of 300 people. There's going to be a response." "There will be," Griphook agreed. "Dumbledore has allies. Many of them. And the public loves him. He's been the grandfatherly protector of the wizarding world for decades. You've dented that image today, but dents can be hammered out. What would you do?" Griphook set down the ledger. He regarded Harry with that sharp, considering look that Harry was learning to recognize as the goblin's thinking face. "Control the narrative," Griphook said. "The Prophet is running your story now because it's sensational, but they'll turn on you the moment it suits them. The editor, Barnabas Cuff, is a weather vane. He prints whatever sells papers, and he's susceptible to ministry pressure. You need an independent voice. A journalist. A good one. Not someone who works for the Prophet." Griphook's chipped tooth glinted. "There's a freelancer. Rita Skeeter. She's vicious, unethical, and she would sell her own mother for an exclusive. She's also the best investigative journalist in Britain, and she has a grudge against Dumbledore that goes back 20 years. Unethical doesn't sound great. Unethical is a tool, Harry. It depends who's wielding it." Harry thought about this. What about someone honest? Honest journalists don't survive long at the Prophet. But there's a man named Xenophilius Lovegood who runs a small publication called The Quibbler. He's eccentric. His paper publishes articles about creatures that may not exist and conspiracies that almost certainly don't. But he's fearless, he's independent, and he prints whatever he believes is true regardless of pressure. Let's talk to both of them, Harry said. Skeeter for the attack. Lovegood for the truth. Griphook stared at him for a moment, then shook his head slowly. You are going to be terrifying when you grow up. I'm fairly terrifying now. You're 5. And yet. Griphook laughed, that barking, sharp laugh, and went back to his ledger. The next 2 days were a blur of preparation. Harry met with Amelia Bones in her office at the DMLE, a clean, organized space that reflected its occupant. Bones was brisk and professional, but there were moments of warmth underneath, like sunlight through heavy curtains. She asked Harry about his life at the Dursleys with the careful directness of someone trained to interview trauma victims, and Harry answered with the same factual clarity he'd used at the Wizengamot. You're remarkably composed for someone your age, Bones said at one point. I've had a lot of practice being calm when things are bad, Harry said. It's a useful skill when you live with the Dursleys. Bones' jaw tightened. She made a note on her parchment and moved on, but Harry noticed she pressed her quill harder for the next few lines. The guardianship paperwork was filed. Bones would serve as Harry's magical guardian, with Gringotts handling his financial affairs. It was an unusual arrangement, unprecedented, really, but the Wizengamot had approved it in the emergency session, and nobody was eager to challenge it publicly. Not with the Prophet running daily follow-ups on the cupboard scandal, as it was being called. The Dursleys were arrested on the second day. Muggle and magical law enforcement cooperated, a rarity, and Vernon and Petunia Dursley were taken from number 4 Privet Drive in handcuffs, screaming about freaks and ingratitude. Dudley was placed with Marge Dursley, Vernon's sister, which Harry felt mildly guilty about because Marge was horrible, but Griphook assured him it was temporary. The gold was recovered. Every Canute. Gringotts did not lose track of gold, and the Dursleys' Muggle accounts were frozen, audited, and garnished with a speed that suggested the goblins had been looking forward to this part. Harry also met with Augusta Longbottom, who arrived at Gringotts in a sweeping green robe and a hat topped with a stuffed vulture that seemed to be judging everyone in the room. So, Augusta said, settling into a chair in Ragnarok's office and fixing Harry with a stare that could have cut glass. You're the boy who made Dumbledore flinch. I'm the boy who asked questions he couldn't answer, Harry said. The flinching was his choice. Augusta studied him for a full 10 seconds without blinking. Then she laughed, a big, booming laugh that made the crystal lanterns rattle. Your grandmother was a friend of mine, you know. Euphemia Potter. Fierce woman. Took no guff from anyone. She leaned forward. I have a grandson your age. Neville. His parents were Aurors, Frank and Alice Longbottom. They were tortured into insanity by Death Eaters after the war. Neville lives with me. Harry's stomach clenched. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be angry. Anger is fuel, boy. The question is what you do with it. Augusta straightened. I've come to offer you an alliance. House Longbottom has stood with House Potter for 6 generations. I'd like that to continue. I'd like that too, Lady Longbottom. Augusta. Augusta. Harry hesitated, then said, could Neville visit? Sometime. I don't. I've never really had a friend. Something shifted in Augusta Longbottom's face. The political mask slipped, and underneath it was something raw and grandmotherly and fierce. I'll bring him this weekend, she said. He's shy, mind you. Quiet. His magic's been slow to manifest, and I worry, she stopped herself. Well. We'll see. Perhaps meeting you will be good for him. After Augusta left, Harry sat alone in the office for a moment. The ring pulsed on his hand. He pressed it against his cheek, the metal was warm, alive, and closed his eyes. 2 days ago he'd been in a cupboard. Now he had allies, resources, a legal guardian, and a plan. The world had tilted on its axis and everything was different and he was still 5 years old and sometimes, in the quiet moments between meetings and strategies, the sheer enormity of it crashed over him like a wave and he felt very small. But then the ring pulsed, and the knowing rose: you are not small. You have never been small. They just kept you in a small place. He opened his eyes. Took a breath. Stood up. On the evening before the Hogwarts visit, Griphook brought him a package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a cloak, not a robe, a cloak, made of fabric so fine it seemed to be woven from liquid silver. When Harry touched it, his fingers disappeared. An invisibility cloak, Griphook said. It was in your parents' vault. Your father's. According to our records, it's been in the Potter family for centuries. Harry draped it over his shoulders and watched his body vanish, leaving only his head floating in midair. This is brilliant. It's a deathly hallow, Griphook said. A what? A conversation for another time. For now, just know that it's yours, it's powerful, and it has a habit of being useful at exactly the right moment. Harry folded the cloak carefully and set it aside. Then he pulled out the file on Hogwarts, the thick one, the one he'd been reading every night, and opened it to the section on staffing. Tomorrow, he said. Tell me what to expect. Griphook sat down. Dumbledore will try to charm you. He's had 2 days to prepare, and he's brilliant at making you feel like the most important person in the room. He'll be warm, apologetic, humble. He'll concede small points to avoid losing big ones. He'll try to make you feel like you're in control while actually steering the conversation. What else? The staff are loyal to him. Most of them. Minerva McGonagall, she's the deputy headmistress, teaches transfiguration. She's fair-minded but she trusts Dumbledore implicitly. Severus Snape, the potions master, hated your father and has a complicated history with your mother. He'll be hostile. Filius Flitwick, charms, is part goblin and the most likely to be sympathetic to you. Pomona Sprout, herbology, is kind but non-confrontational. The rest are peripheral. And the castle itself? Griphook paused. The castle is alive, Harry. Not sentient exactly, but aware. It was built by the 4 founders and infused with their magic. It responds to their heirs. When you walk through those doors, Hogwarts will know you. Harry looked at the ring on his hand. 2 of the 4 founders. Half the castle's blood. Good, he said. I want it to. He went to bed early, but sleep was slow to come. He lay in the dark and thought about tomorrow, about walking into a castle he'd never seen, about confronting a man who'd controlled his life from the shadows for 4 years. He thought about his parents, who'd died to protect him, whose wishes had been ignored by the man they trusted most. He thought about the cupboard. He wasn't nervous. He was ready. The ring glowed softly in the dark, and somewhere far to the north, a castle stirred in its sleep, and the ancient magic in its stones hummed with a frequency it hadn't used in centuries, because it could feel him coming. Its heir. Its heirs. The lion and the serpent. Harry closed his eyes. Tomorrow, he would walk into Hogwarts for the first time. Tomorrow, everything would change. Chapter 3, A school divided. The morning was grey and Scottish and smelled like rain that hadn't quite decided to fall. Harry stood at the gates of Hogwarts and looked up, and for a few seconds he forgot about politics and lordships and Dumbledore and everything else, because the castle was the most extraordinary thing he had ever seen. It rose out of the landscape like something that had grown rather than been built, towers and turrets and battlements reaching into the low clouds, stone walls dark with age, windows glinting like hundreds of half-closed eyes. The lake below it was black and still. The forest beyond it was dark and deep and clearly wanted to be left alone. The whole scene looked like an illustration from one of the books Harry had read in the little whinging library, the kind of picture he'd stared at for minutes at a time, pressing his fingers against the page as if he could push through it into the world on the other side. Now he was on the other side. Harry. Griphook said. Harry realized he'd stopped walking. Sorry. It's just. I know. The gates were wrought iron, tall as houses, flanked by stone pillars topped with winged boars. They were closed. Harry walked up to them and put his hand against the metal, and the ring on his finger flared, not hot, not painful, just bright, and the gates swung open without a sound. The path beyond led up a long slope toward the castle's main entrance. Harry walked it with Griphook at his side and 2 goblin warriors behind. Ragnak had insisted on the escort, and Harry hadn't argued. He could feel the castle as he approached. Not in his mind, not like a voice, more like a vibration in his chest, a resonance, the way you can feel a bass note in your bones even when you can't quite hear it. The closer he got, the stronger it became. The main doors were oak, massive, banded with iron. Harry reached for the handle and the doors opened before he touched them, swinging inward with a groan of ancient hinges, revealing the entrance hall. Stone floors. Vaulted ceiling. Torches in brackets along the walls, burning with steady amber light. A marble staircase sweeping upward. And standing at the foot of that staircase, arranged in a line that was clearly meant to look casual but was anything but, the staff of Hogwarts. Dumbledore was at the center. He'd chosen different robes, deep burgundy, less whimsical than the star-covered ones from the Wizengamot, projecting an image of seriousness and warmth. His hands were clasped in front of him and his expression was welcoming and his blue eyes twinkled behind his half-moon spectacles. He looked like a man who had nothing to hide and no reason to worry. To his left stood a tall, stern-faced witch in emerald-green robes with her graying black hair pulled back in a tight bun. Minerva McGonagall. She was looking at Harry with an expression that was harder to read, curiosity, caution, something that might have been protectiveness but might also have been suspicion. To Dumbledore's right was a man in black. All black, robes, buttons, boots, hair, mood. Severus Snape looked like someone had carved him from a single piece of cold displeasure. His dark eyes locked onto Harry the moment the doors opened and didn't move, and what Harry saw in them was a complicated tangle, hostility, recognition, something that looked like pain. Beyond them, the other staff spread out like supporting characters in a painting, a tiny wizard who had to be Flitwick, beaming, a stout witch in earth-toned robes who was almost certainly Sprout, nervously straightening her hat, a wild-haired woman draped in shawls and beads who smelled, even from across the hall, of cooking sherry, and several others Harry matched to files he'd memorized. Lord Potter, Dumbledore said, stepping forward with his arms open in a gesture of welcome. Welcome to Hogwarts. Harry walked into the entrance hall, and the castle responded. It wasn't subtle. Every torch on every wall flared from amber to brilliant gold. The marble staircase shuddered and realigned itself, the steps adjusting until they pointed directly at Harry like a compass needle. Somewhere deep in the castle, a bell rang, not the school bell, something older, something that resonated in the stones themselves. The suits of armor along the walls turned their helmeted heads toward Harry in unison, and with a collective metallic groan, they raised their swords in salute. The staff stared. Harry kept walking. "Thank you, Headmaster," he said. "I appreciate you arranging this visit on short notice." "It is your school," Dumbledore said, and to his credit, only someone paying very close attention would have noticed the effort behind the smile. "You are welcome here always. I'll hold you to that." Harry stopped in the center of the hall and looked around. The vibration in his chest was a roar now, a full-body resonance, the castle pressing against his awareness like a massive, ancient cat demanding attention. He could feel the corridors branching outward, the staircases shifting, the rooms opening and closing, the entire structure alive and awake and glad. He put his hand flat against the nearest wall. The stone was warm under his palm. "Hello," he thought. And the castle answered. Not in words. In images, feelings, impressions. A rush of sensation, centuries of students, laughter, magic, learning, footsteps on stone, spells cast in classrooms, midnight feasts in dorm rooms, first kisses in hidden alcoves, tears in empty corridors, the slow accumulation of 1,000 years of life lived within these walls. Harry gasped. His eyes watered. The ring blazed on his hand. Then it settled, like a wave that had crashed and now drew back, and Harry was left with a quiet awareness, the castle's awareness, layered beneath his own, vast and patient and warm. He knew where every room was. Every corridor. Every secret passage. He could feel the wards like a second skin, pulsing with protective magic that ran deeper than the foundations. He could feel the students, hundreds of them, in classrooms throughout the building, their magical signatures like candle flames, each one distinct. He took his hand off the wall. The staff was still staring. "Lord Potter," McGonagall said, and her voice was careful, measured, the voice of someone who was fundamentally fair but didn't yet know what to make of the situation. "Are you quite all right?" "I'm fine, Professor McGonagall." The castle was saying hello. Harry looked at her. "You sent a letter to the Dursleys when I was a baby. Trying to stop Dumbledore from placing me there. You sat on the wall outside their house all day, watching them." McGonagall went very still. "You told Dumbledore they were the worst sort of muggles. That I shouldn't be left with them." Harry paused. "You were right." Something crossed McGonagall's face, a crack in the professional mask, a flash of guilt and anger and old, unresolved frustration. "I should have done more than write a letter." "You should have," Harry agreed, "and it wasn't cruel, it was honest, the way only a child can be honest, without softening or evasion. But you tried. That counts." McGonagall pressed her lips together and nodded once, sharply, and Harry saw her eyes glisten before she blinked it away. "Perhaps," Dumbledore said, gently steering, "we should begin the tour. I thought we might start with the Great Hall, then proceed to the classrooms. I'd like to start with the third-floor corridor," Harry said. The temperature in the entrance hall dropped 3 degrees. Figuratively. Possibly literally, the torches flickered. "The third-floor corridor is currently restricted," Dumbledore began. "I asked you to remove the Philosopher's Stone before my visit. Did you?" A beat of silence. The staff exchanged glances. Most of them, Harry realized, didn't know about the stone. Their confusion was genuine. "The stone is being moved to a more secure location," Dumbledore said carefully. "The process is delicate and requires, yes or no, Headmaster. Is it still in the building?" "Yes." Harry turned to Griphook. "Note that for the record, please." Griphook, who had already been writing, inclined his head. Harry walked toward the marble staircase. The stairs didn't shift, they held steady, pointing his way, practically rolling out a carpet. Behind him, the staff scrambled to follow, robes swishing on stone, whispered conversations breaking out like small fires. He felt the castle guiding him. Third floor. Right corridor. The awareness he'd gained when he touched the wall was like having a map burned into his mind. He didn't need directions, didn't need to think about it. He just walked, and the castle adjusted around him, doors opening before he reached them, torches flaring to light as he approached and dimming as he passed. The third-floor corridor was at the end of a long hallway, sealed behind a heavy door that bore a sign, "Strictly out of bounds to all students." "This door," Harry said, standing before it, "is locked with a basic Alohomora charm. First-year spell. There are additional protections beyond," Dumbledore started. "A first-year spell," Harry repeated. "On the doors separating hundreds of children from something that can kill them." "What's behind this door, Headmaster?" "For the benefit of your staff, who I'm guessing you haven't told." Dumbledore was silent. Harry opened the door. The room beyond was large and dark, and it smelled of wet dog, but amplified, concentrated, the smell of something much bigger than any dog had a right to be. As the light from the corridor spilled in, Harry saw it, 3 heads, 6 eyes, a body the size of a small elephant. A Cerberus. It was sleeping, its 3 noses twitching, its massive flanks rising and falling. "That," Harry said to the assembled staff, "is a 3-headed dog. It's the first line of defense protecting the Philosopher's Stone. which Headmaster Dumbledore moved to this school last summer. McGonagall's face went the color of chalk. Albus. You put a Cerberus in the school. Fluffy is perfectly safe as long as, Dumbledore began. Fluffy? Snape said, and for the first time his voice held something other than disdain. It held disbelief. The dog belongs to Hagrid, Dumbledore said. He's trained, he's a Class 5 dangerous creature in a school full of 11-year-olds, Harry said. Behind a door locked with a first-year charm. What's next? He didn't wait for an answer. He reached out with the castle's awareness and felt the protections layered beneath the Cerberus, Devil's Snare, a plant that strangled you to death unless you knew to relax. Enchanted flying keys. A life-size chess set where the pieces attacked the players. A troll. A logic puzzle involving potions, some of which were poisonous. And at the end, the Mirror of Eriste, which showed the viewer their deepest desire. Harry described each one, calmly, in order, standing in the doorway of the Cerberus room with the entire staff behind him and the three-headed dog snoring 20 feet away. When he finished, the silence was deafening. Professor Flitwick was the first to speak. The tiny charms professor stepped forward, his face flushed, his hands trembling, not with fear, but with fury. Albus, Flitwick said, and his squeaky voice had gone very low and very quiet. A troll. You put a troll under the school. While my students sleep above it. The protections are designed to delay, not to harm, they are designed to be beatable, Harry said. That's the problem. These aren't protections. They're a puzzle. And they're calibrated for, what? Bright first years. A motivated student could get through every one of these obstacles. He looked at Dumbledore. They're supposed to, aren't they? That's the point. You want someone to get through. Dumbledore said nothing. His silence was answer enough. You set a trap, Harry said. In a school. Using children as bait. That is a gross oversimplification, then simplify it for me, Headmaster. I'm 5. Snape made a sound that might have been a strangled laugh. He covered it with a cough. The stone is bait for Voldemort, Harry said. Or for one of his agents. You know someone's going to try for it, and you want them to try here, where you can control the situation. You're using Hogwarts as a mousetrap. Dumbledore's expression shifted. The warm, grandfatherly mask thinned, and beneath it Harry caught a glimpse of the real man, not evil, not cruel, but relentlessly strategic, the kind of mind that saw the world as a chessboard and everyone in it as pieces. Including children. Including Harry. The threat is real, Dumbledore said. And the stone cannot remain at Gringotts. There was an attempted break-in last summer. Director Ragnarok told me about the break-in, Harry cut in. Vault 713. Someone got past the first level of security before the goblin defenses triggered. It was the only successful breach in Gringotts history, and Ragnarok was livid. He's since upgraded the vault protections to levels that would stop a small army. Harry paused. He offered to take the stone back, by the way. For free. With personal guarantees. You declined. The stone is safer here, the stone is not the issue. Harry's voice rose for the first time, not a shout, but sharp, edged, and the castle responded, the torches flaring, the stones vibrating underfoot. The Cerberus stirred in its sleep, one head lifting briefly before settling back down. The issue is that you chose to turn a school into a battleground. You could have put the stone in any number of secure locations. You could have worked with Flammel to move it abroad. You could have destroyed it. Instead, you brought it here. To a building full of children. Because it suited your strategy. Dumbledore looked at Harry, and for a moment, just a moment, the mask dropped entirely. What Harry saw underneath was not a villain. It was worse than that. It was a man who had spent so long fighting a war that he'd forgotten the difference between soldiers and civilians, who had made so many terrible choices for good reasons that the reasons and the choices had blurred together into a grey fog of necessity. "I have spent 50 years protecting this world," Dumbledore said quietly. "I have made choices that haunt me. But I am trying, I have always been trying, to keep people safe." "You failed," Harry said. "With me, you failed. And you're failing these students right now." The words hung in the corridor like smoke. "I want the stone removed by end of day," Harry said. "Griphook will coordinate with your staff. If it's still here tomorrow morning, I'll remove it myself and return it to Flammel. Are we clear?" Dumbledore held Harry's gaze for a long, charged moment. Then he nodded, once. "We are clear." Harry turned away from the door. "Now, I'd like to see the rest of the school." The tour was different after that. The staff followed Harry through the corridors in a loose, slightly stunned formation, and the castle continued to respond to him, doors opening, torches brightening, a suit of armor on the 4th floor bowing so enthusiastically it fell off its pedestal with a crash that made Sprout jump and clutch her hat. Harry visited every classroom. He sat in a desk in McGonagall's transfiguration room and felt the residual magic of 1,000 demonstrations, matchsticks to needles, mice to snuff boxes, the incremental alchemy of changing one thing into another. He stood in Flitwick's Charms classroom and the feathers on the practice shelf levitated on their own, drifting toward him like snow falling upward. He walked through the greenhouses with Sprout, who forgot her nervousness and spent 20 minutes explaining the life cycle of a venomous tentacula with the passion of someone who genuinely loved what she taught. "You're a very good teacher," Harry told her. Sprout blinked, smiled, blinked again, and her eyes went suspiciously bright. "Thank you, dear. That's very kind." "It's not kind. It's true. There's a difference." The dungeons were cold. Harry felt at the moment he descended the stairs, not just the physical chill, but something else, a damp, oppressive weight to the air that pressed against the castle's warmth like a bruise. Snape's classroom was exactly what Harry had expected, dark, cluttered with jars of unsettling things, and permeated with a cold precision that reflected its occupant. Snape stood by his desk and watched Harry examine the room with an expression that hadn't shifted from hostility since the entrance hall. "So," Snape said, when the silence had stretched long enough. "The famous Harry Potter. Come to inspect my classroom like a landlord checking for damp." "Professor Snape," Harry said. He'd been waiting for this. Griphook had briefed him extensively. Severus Snape, former Death Eater, turned spy, deeply complicated history with both of Harry's parents. Brilliant. Bitter. Dangerous. Your academic record is extraordinary. Youngest potions master in a century. Published in every major journal. The curriculum you've designed is rigorous and comprehensive. Snape's eyebrow rose a fraction. He hadn't expected that. Your student outcomes, however, are terrible. The eyebrow came back down. Hard. Failure rate of 32%. Complaint rate of 67%. Not a single student from a non-Slytherin house has rated your teaching above poor in 4 years. Harry pulled a sheet from Griphook's satchel. You also have the highest rate of student injuries of any professor on staff, including 3 incidents involving cauldron explosions that required hospitalization. Potions is a dangerous subject. Potions is a dangerous subject taught by someone who, by multiple accounts, actively terrorizes students. Harry looked at Snape. You called a second-year Gryffindor an insufferable dunderhead in front of her entire class last week. She cried for 2 hours. Her name is Sarah Chin. She's 12. Snape's jaw clenched. I do not coddle students. There's a gap between coddling and cruelty, Professor. A wide one. You're standing on the wrong side of it. The room was very quiet. Harry could hear the faint bubbling of a cauldron left simmering on low heat in the corner, the drip of condensation from the ceiling. You have a choice, Harry said. Reform your teaching methods, treat all students with basic decency regardless of house affiliation, and bring your failure rate below 10% by the end of next year. Or resign. I don't care which. But what's been happening in this classroom stops today. Snape looked at Harry with an expression that was genuinely unreadable, layers of anger, pride, something wounded, and underneath all of it, the faintest flicker of something that might have been recognition. Not of James Potter. Of someone else. A red-headed girl from a Muggle family who'd been Snape's only friend, who'd seen something worth saving in him, who'd died trying to protect the baby that was now standing in his classroom and telling him to be better. You have your mother's eyes, Snape said. It came out rough, almost involuntary, like a stone dislodged from a wall. I know, Harry said. I'm told she was kind. But she didn't tolerate bullies either. Snape flinched. It was small. It was real. And then the mask was back, cold and hard, and he said, I will consider your suggestions, Lord Potter. They're not suggestions. I will consider your demands, Lord Potter. That's better. Harry left the dungeons and climbed back toward the light, and the castle warmed around him as he rose, the oppressive chill of the lower levels giving way to something more generous. He felt the transition in his bones, the castle responding to his mood, adjusting, attending. He visited the hospital wing, where Madame Pomfrey, a brisk, competent witch who radiated no-nonsense efficiency, showed him the medical facilities and complained, at length and without prompting, about the number of Quidditch injuries she treated annually. Broken bones, concussions, one boy last year swallowed a snitch. A snitch. And the broomsticks they let first years use are older than I am. She fixed Harry with a look. If you're really in charge, the first thing you should do is update the medical equipment. Half my diagnostic charms are obsolete. Done, Harry said. Pomfrey blinked. Just like that. Just like that. Send a list to Griphook. Whatever you need. She stared at him, then at Griphook, then back at him. You're not what I expected. Nobody ever is, at 5. He visited the library, which was magnificent, vast, hushed, smelling of old paper and leather and the particular kind of dust that accumulates on knowledge. Madame Pants, the librarian, watched him like a hawk watching a field mouse, clearly torn between reverence for his status and terror that he might touch a book with sticky fingers. He visited the great hall, where the enchanted ceiling showed the grey Scottish sky and 4 long house tables stretched the length of the room. The staff table at the far end was elevated on a platform, and behind it, mounted on the wall, were the 4 house banners, Gryffindor's lion, Slytherin's serpent, Ravenclaw's eagle, Hufflepuff's badger. Harry stood in the center of the empty hall and looked up at the banners and felt the castle's awareness wrap around him, and for a moment he understood what the founders had built. Not just a school. A place. A place where children, all children, magical children who might otherwise have grown up confused and frightened and alone, could come and learn and belong. That was what Hogwarts was supposed to be. He was going to make sure it was. The final stop was Dumbledore's office. The gargoyle that guarded the entrance leapt aside before Harry even reached it, and the spiral staircase began turning without a password. Harry rode it up and stepped into the headmaster's office. It was a circular room, cluttered with instruments and portraits and the accumulated detritus of centuries. The portraits of former headmasters and headmistresses lined the walls, and every single one of them was awake, watching Harry with expressions ranging from curiosity to alarm. A beautiful red and gold bird sat on a perch near the desk, a phoenix, Harry knew, feeling its magic like a warm current in the air. The phoenix looked at Harry. Harry looked at the phoenix. The bird trilled a single note, pure and piercing, and flew from its perch to Harry's shoulder. Its weight was almost nothing. Its warmth was immense. Fawkes has never done that with anyone but me, Dumbledore said from behind his desk. Fawkes is a free creature, Harry said. He goes where he chooses. The phoenix trilled again, pressing its head against Harry's cheek. Dumbledore sat behind his desk. The staff filed in behind Harry, filling the office until it was standing room only. McGonagall stood to one side, arms crossed, her expression a mask of controlled tension. Snape lurked near the door like a shadow with opinions. Flitwick had climbed onto a stack of books to see over Sprout's hat. "I've seen the school," Harry said. "I've seen the classrooms, the facilities, the protections. I've talked to your staff." He paused. "I have concerns." "I'm sure you do," Dumbledore said. "The defense against the dark arts position has been cursed for decades. You've known about the curse and done nothing to break it. Every year, a new professor. Some of them incompetent, some of them dangerous, one of them an actual Death Eater in disguise." That got a reaction. Several of the staff turned to look at each other. "The result is that your students have received inconsistent, unreliable education in the single most important subject for their survival. The curse is extremely powerful, you're Albus Dumbledore. You're supposed to be the most powerful wizard alive. If you can't break a curse on a teaching position, who can? It was placed by Voldemort himself, then call in a team. Call in the goblins, they're the best curse breakers in the world. Call in the Department of Mysteries. You have resources. You have connections. You chose not to use them." Harry let that sit. "Why?" Dumbledore was quiet. "I think I know why," Harry said. "I think the revolving door of defense professors suited you. It meant the position was always available for whoever you wanted to install in a given year, a spy, an ally, a useful idiot. It was a tool. Like the stone. Like me. Harry, Lord Potter." Dumbledore closed his eyes briefly. "Opened them. Lord Potter. You are making assumptions about my motives that are not entirely fair. Then correct me. Explain why a curse that has destroyed dozens of careers and endangered thousands of students has been allowed to persist for decades under your watch." Silence. "I thought so." Harry straightened. The phoenix shifted on his shoulder, settling. "Here's what's going to happen. Griphook." The goblin stepped forward and opened the satchel. He produced a thick document, leather-bound, sealed with the crests of Gryffindor and Slytherin, and laid it on Dumbledore's desk. "This is a formal notice of termination," Harry said. "Effective immediately. Under the Founders' Charter, Section 12, Paragraph 3, the holder of 2 or more founder seats may remove any staff member from Hogwarts for cause being defined as, and I'm quoting, actions or negligence that endanger the students, compromise the educational mission of the school, or violate the trust placed in the position." The room went airless. "You have endangered students by placing the Philosopher's Stone in the school and by maintaining inadequate protections around it. You have compromised the educational mission by allowing the defense curse to persist, by failing to address staff misconduct," a pointed glance at Snape, "and by neglecting the school's infrastructure and resources. You have violated the trust placed in your position by using Hogwarts as a strategic asset in your personal war against Voldemort, rather than operating it as the educational institution it was built to be." Harry looked at Dumbledore. "You're fired, headmaster." 3 seconds of absolute silence. Then the portraits erupted. Every former headmaster and headmistress was shouting at once, outrage, support, disbelief, indignation. Phineas Nigellus Black was yelling something about the audacity of children. A witch in a medieval wimple was applauding. Armando Dip Pet was weeping into his painted handkerchief. The staff was frozen. McGonagall's hand was over her mouth. Flitwick had gone pale. Sprout was gripping a potted plant so hard that it squeaked. Snape was standing very still, and the look on his face was one that Harry couldn't parse, shock, yes, but underneath it something else, something almost like liberation. Dumbledore sat behind his desk and looked at the termination document and looked at Harry and the phoenix on his shoulder and the ring on his hand, and for the first time in the many long years of his extraordinary life, Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore did not know what to say. "This is..." he began. "Legal," Griphook said. Binding. Reviewed by Gringotts Legal Division and countersigned by Madame Amelia Bones as Lord Potter's magical guardian. The Founders' Charter is clear. You may, of course, appeal to the full Board of Governors. But given that Lord Potter holds 2 of the 4 founder seats and the board has already been notified of the charges, I would not be optimistic about your prospects. Albus, McGonagall said, and her voice was strained. Is it true? The stone? The traps? You used the school as a, Minerva, is it true? Dumbledore looked at his deputy. At the woman who had stood beside him for 30 years, who had trusted him, defended him, followed his lead in everything from curriculum decisions to wars. And Harry watched the old man make a calculation, saw it happen behind those blue eyes, the rapid assessment of options, the weighing of lies against truth, the habitual reach for manipulation followed by the slow, painful realization that it wasn't going to work this time. Yes, Dumbledore said. It's true. McGonagall made a sound that was almost a gasp, caught it, pressed it down. Her face went rigid. Her eyes were bright and furious. 30 years, she said. 30 years I have trusted you. Defended you. When the ministry questioned your judgment, I stood up for you. When parents complained, I reassured them. When my own instincts told me something was wrong, when I sat on that wall and watched those terrible muggles and you told me to trust you, her voice cracked. I trusted you. Minerva, please, don't. She held up a hand. Don't Minerva me. Not right now. She turned to Harry. Lord Potter. You mentioned appointing an interim headmistress. Deputy Headmistress McGonagall, Harry said, would you accept the position? She looked at him. He looked at her. The phoenix on his shoulder sang a soft, clear note. I would, McGonagall said. Then it's yours. Effective immediately. Harry turned back to Dumbledore. You have 24 hours to remove your personal effects from this office. Your quarters will be reassigned. Your access to the school's wards will be revoked. Griphook will coordinate the transition with Professor McGonagall. Dumbledore stood. He was very tall when he stood, taller than Harry remembered from the Wizengamot, tall enough that he seemed to fill the room. For a moment, Harry felt the weight of the man's power, not his political power, not his institutional authority, but his raw magical force. Albus Dumbledore was the most powerful wizard alive, and that power pressed against the air like heat from a furnace. Harry met his eyes and didn't flinch. The magic of 4 houses hummed in his blood. The castle wrapped around him like armor. The phoenix sat on his shoulder like a crown. You're making a mistake, Dumbledore said quietly. That's possible, Harry said. But it's my mistake to make. You don't get to make them for me anymore. Dumbledore looked at him for a long, long moment. Then he reached into his robes, pulled out his wand, 15 inches, elder wood, thestral tail hair, the most powerful wand in existence, though Harry didn't know that yet, and tapped the termination document. His signature appeared at the bottom in flowing purple ink. I accept the terms, Dumbledore said. Under protest. Noted. Dumbledore walked to the door. The staff parted for him. At the threshold, he turned back. When Voldemort returns, and he will return, you will need me. Maybe, Harry said. But I'll need you as an ally, not a puppet master. There's a difference. When you figure out what that difference is, come find me. Dumbledore held his gaze for one more heartbeat. Then he left. His footsteps echoed on the spiral staircase, growing fainter, and then they were gone, and the office was quiet except for the soft whirring of silver instruments and the gentle trilling of the phoenix, who had not followed its former companion out the door. Harry let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Right, he said. Professor McGonagall. We have work to do. The rest of the day was a controlled avalanche. McGonagall, once she processed the shock, was formidable, she threw herself into the transition with the fierce efficiency of someone who had been holding back for decades and was finally allowed to run. She commandeered the office, summoned the house elves, Harry met the house elves, and that was a whole separate issue he filed away for later, and began issuing directives with a speed that left the other staff scrambling. Harry sat in a conjured chair by the fireplace, a real chair, not the ornate throne Dumbledore had used, just a comfortable armchair that happened to be sized for a 5-year-old, and went through the school's documentation with griphook. The budget was a disaster. Hogwarts was funded through student fees, ministry subsidies, and the founder's endowment, and Dumbledore had been drawing on the endowment for years to fund projects that had nothing to do with education. The Order of the Phoenix. Political campaigns. Personal research. He hadn't stolen, exactly, he'd redirected, which was a distinction that made Griphook bare his teeth. New budget, Harry said. Griphook, work with McGonagall. Prioritize, medical equipment for Pomfrey, new brooms for the flying classes, curriculum updates for defense against the dark arts, and a full structural assessment of the castle by goblin engineers. The cost, I have 4 vaults, Griphook. The Potter Vault alone could fund this school for a century. Use what's needed. Staff meetings followed. Harry sat in on all of them, not speaking much, mostly listening, watching the dynamics. McGonagall was respected but not universally loved. Snape was feared. Flitwick was the quiet glue that held the faculty together. Sprout was the emotional center, the one who asked how people were feeling when everyone else was focused on logistics. The defense against the dark arts position was discussed at length. The current professor, a nervous man named Quirrell who wore a turban and stuttered, was absent. He'd been absent for 3 days, actually. Nobody seemed particularly concerned about this, which concerned Harry. "Where is Professor Quirrell?" Harry asked. Glances exchanged. Shrugs. "He said he was feeling unwell," Sprout offered. "He's been a bit off all year, actually." Jumpy. Harry reached out with the castle's awareness. He searched for Quirrell's magical signature. He'd felt it briefly during the tour, a flickering, unstable presence on the edge of the school's wards. He found it now, in a room on the 3rd floor. Near the corridor where the stone had been. The signature was wrong. Doubled. Like 2 candle flames burning in one lamp, one weak and sputtering, the other dark and cold and hungry. "Griphook," Harry said quietly. "I need to speak with Amelia Bones. Immediately." The goblin looked at him. Read his expression. Nodded. Within the hour, Amelia Bones was at Hogwarts with a team of 6 Aurors. Harry met them at the main gates, explained what he'd felt, and let Bones take the lead. She was crisp, decisive, professional. She deployed her team with hand signals and minimal conversation, and they moved through the castle like a well-oiled machine. They found Quirrell in a disused classroom on the 3rd floor. He was standing in front of a mirror, the mirror of Erist, which Dumbledore's staff had been in the process of moving, and he was talking to himself. Or rather, talking to the back of his own head. Harry felt it from the corridor. The second signature. The dark, cold, hungry one. It pressed against his scar, and his scar burned, not painfully, but with a fierce, hot awareness, the ring on his hand flaring in response. "There's something in him," Harry told Bones. "Something that isn't him. In his head. Under the turban." Bones gave him a sharp look, then signaled her Aurors. They moved in fast. What happened next was messy and loud and over quickly. Quirrell screamed when the Aurors breached the room. He drew his wand and fired a curse that missed by a wide margin, and then 3 stunners hit him simultaneously and he crumpled. His turban came loose as he fell, unwinding, and what was underneath, Harry had seen unpleasant things. He'd lived in a cupboard under the stairs for 4 years. But the face on the back of Quirrell's head was something else entirely. It was flat, gray, parasitic, pressed against the skull like a mask made of skin, with red eyes that opened and found Harry and knew him. "Potter," the face hissed. We meet again. Harry's scar exploded with pain. He gasped, stumbled, caught himself. The ring blazed. The castle shuddered around them, stones grinding, torches flaring white. Every suit of armor in the corridor turned and raised its weapon toward the thing on Quirrell's head. "Hello, Tom," Harry said through gritted teeth. The red eyes widened. The face contorted, rage, disbelief, something that might have been fear. "You dare, Tom Marvolo Riddle," Harry said. "Half-blood. Orphan. Former head boy. I know who you are. I know what you are. A wraith. A fragment. You're barely alive." He straightened, the pain in his scar fierce but manageable, the ring's magic pushing back against it. "And you're in my school. Your school." The face laughed, a thin, terrible sound. "Hogwarts belongs to the strong, boy. You are nothing. A child playing at power. I am the heir of Slytherin," Harry said. "By right of conquest." "Your conquest, Tom. Your line. Your magic. Mine now." He held up his hand, and the ring blazed with emerald light, and the Slytherin magic surged through Harry's blood and reached for the wraith, and the face on the back of Quirrell's head screamed. It was a sound that shattered glass and cracked stone and sent the Auror staggering. A dark mist erupted from Quirrell's skull, swirling, coalescing, trying to form a shape, and the castle's wards slammed down on it like a fist. The wards were Harry's now. He felt them respond to his will, vast and ancient and irresistible. The dark mist shrieked and thrashed and fought, and Harry held the wards closed around it and felt the thing that was Voldemort, the shattered remnant of Tom Riddle's soul, batter against the containment like a bird in a cage. "Bones," Harry said, his voice strained. "I can hold him. Get Quirrell out. Now." The Aurors moved. They levitated Quirrell's unconscious body out of the room and down the corridor. Bones stayed, her wand raised, her monocle askew, watching Harry hold the most dangerous dark wizard in history in a cage of ancient magic. The wraith fought for 30 seconds more. Then it broke free, not through the wards, but around them, finding a crack in the castle's outer defenses, a point where the ancient stones had weakened, and it poured through and was gone, streaming into the Scottish sky like a smear of dark smoke. Harry dropped to one knee. The ring dimmed. The castle's lights flickered and steadied. "He's gone," Harry said. "Out of the wards. I couldn't hold him." Bones was at his side. Her hand on his shoulder was firm and grounding. "You just contained a fragment of you-know-whose soul with castle wards, Lord Potter. At the age of 5. I think you can forgive yourself for not destroying him outright." Harry managed a weak grin. "It would have been neater. Life rarely is." They went back to the office. McGonagall, who had been informed by a breathless Auror, was white-faced and vibrating with a fury so intense it was practically visible. "Voldemort," she said. "In the school. In a professor." "Dumbledore must have known," Flitwick said. "He must have. Quirrell was hired on Dumbledore's recommendation. If there was a dark entity attached to the man, he knew," Harry said tiredly. He was sitting in his armchair by the fire, and the phoenix had returned to his shoulder, it sung a low, healing warmth that was slowly unknotting the tension in his body. He knew, or he suspected, and he let it play out because he wanted to see what would happen. Because it was part of the plan. McGonagall sat down heavily in the headmistress's chair. She put her face in her hands. For a moment, she was not the formidable deputy, not the new head of Hogwarts, just a woman confronting the depth of betrayal by someone she trusted with her life. "How do we fix this?" she asked, raising her head. "One thing at a time," Harry said. "The stone goes back to Flamel. Tonight. The Cerberus goes back to wherever Cerberuses go. The traps are dismantled. The defense curse gets priority. I want a team of goblin curse breakers here within the week. We hire a real defense professor, someone with actual combat experience, vetted properly. I have some names, Bones said from the doorway. Former Aurors who've gone into private practice. Good people. Send me the list. And what about Dumbledore? McGonagall asked. Harry looked at the phoenix. Fawkes trilled softly and nuzzled his cheek. Dumbledore isn't the enemy. He's a man who lost his way. He let the war consume him until everything looked like a battlefield, including this school. If he can learn to see clearly again, to trust people instead of manipulating them, he could still do a lot of good. And if he can't, then he stays out of my way. The sun was setting over the Scottish Highlands, turning the clouds the color of fire. Harry stood at the window of the headmistress's office, his office, technically, though he'd told McGonagall to use it, since he wasn't actually old enough to attend Hogwarts yet, let alone run it, and watched the light change. He was tired. Bone deep, 5-year-old tired, the kind of tired that makes your eyes gritty and your thoughts fuzzy and your body feel like it's made of wet sand. He'd held Voldemort's wraith in the castle wards. He'd fired Albus Dumbledore. He'd confronted Severus Snape. He'd walked the halls of a 1,000-year-old castle that called him heir. He was 5. The ring pulsed gently on his hand. The castle hummed around him, warm and watchful. Griphook appeared at his shoulder. We should return to Gringotts. You need rest. One more thing. Harry pulled a piece of parchment from his pocket. He'd written on it earlier, in the careful, oversized handwriting of a child who taught himself to write in a cupboard. Dear Neville, my name is Harry. Your grandmother said you might visit this weekend. I hope you will. I have a lot to tell you, and I think we might be friends. Also, I met a phoenix today. I think you'd like him. Harry he folded the letter and gave it to Griphook. Can you send this to Augusta Longbottom's grandson? Griphook took the letter with a gentleness that would have surprised anyone who didn't know him. Of course. They left through the main gates. The castle watched them go, its windows warm with light, its towers sharp against the darkening sky. As Harry passed through the gates, he felt the wards settle behind him, not closing, not locking him out. Waiting. Patient. He'd be back. In the cart ride down to his quarters, the goblin warriors flanking him in the tunnels, the underground wind whipping his hair, Harry let his head fall back against the seat and closed his eyes. The day replayed behind his eyelids in fragments, Dumbledore's face when the termination letter landed. McGonagall's voice cracking. Snape's involuntary flinch. The red eyes of Voldemort's wraith. Fawkes, warm and golden on his shoulder. The cupboard under the stairs felt like a lifetime ago. It was 4 days ago. He was changing the world. He was 5 years old. He was exhausted and exhilarated, and somewhere underneath all of it, in a place he didn't show anyone, he was a small boy who missed parents he'd never known and wanted, more than anything, to be told he was doing okay. The ring pulsed. You're doing okay. Harry smiled in the dark and let the cart carry him home. Chapter 4, The Phoenix and the Serpent. The backlash started at dawn. Harry was eating breakfast in his Gringotts quarters, scrambled eggs, toast, bacon, orange juice, a frankly absurd quantity of sausages because the goblin kitchen staff had decided he was too thin and had made it their personal mission to fix that, when Griphook came through the door with a stack of newspapers and an expression that said the day was already ruined. Read, Griphook said, dropping the stack on the table. The Daily Prophet's front page was dominated by a photograph of Dumbledore, not a recent one, but a carefully chosen portrait that made him look wise, kindly, and slightly wounded. The headline screamed, Dumbledore ousted by Child Lord, dark goblin influence suspected below it, in smaller but still aggressive type, he's 5 years old, says concerned ministry official. Who's really making the decisions? Harry read the article while eating a sausage. It was, as Griphook had predicted, a hit piece, not against Dumbledore, but against Harry. The anonymous ministry sources painted a picture of a confused, manipulated child being used as a puppet by Gringotts to seize control of Wizarding Britain's most beloved institution. Dumbledore was cast as the victim, a dedicated educator, a war hero, a protector of the light, brought down by a goblin-orchestrated coup. The article mentioned Harry's age 14 times. Barnabas Cuff wrote this himself, Griphook said. He received a visit from Dumbledore last night. And one from Lucius Malfoy this morning. Dumbledore and Malfoy working together. Strange bedfellows, but they have a common interest. Dumbledore wants his position back. Malfoy wants you discredited before you can use your founder seats to remove him from the Board of Governors. The prophet is the weapon they both know how to use. Harry set down the paper and picked up another sausage. What else? Griphook produced a second paper, thinner, more colorful, with a masthead that read the Quibbler in a font that looked like it had been designed by someone under the influence of something creative. Harry Potter Speaks, The Boy Who Lived Tells His Story exclusive interview inside, plus, are Nargles responsible for missing socks? Page 7, Lovegood ran the piece, Harry said. Lovegood ran the piece. Exactly as you gave it to him, with no editorial changes. Including the details about the cupboard, the financial theft, the Philosopher's Stone, and the Voldemort Wraith. It's honest, it's complete, and it's already circulating among the Wizengamot members who don't trust the prophet. Harry had given the interview 2 days ago, the evening after the Hogwarts visit. Xenophilius Lovegood had arrived at Gringotts in robes that appeared to be made from curtain fabric, with wild white blonde hair and eyes that were simultaneously dreamy and razor-sharp. He'd brought his daughter, Luna, 4 years old, with the same white blonde hair and an unblinking stare that made Harry feel like she was looking at something just behind his left ear. "Hello, Harry Potter," Luna had said. "You have a very interesting aura. There's a lion and a snake and they're playing." Harry had liked her immediately. The interview had been straightforward. Lovegood asked questions. Harry answered them. No spin, no agenda, no attempt to shape the narrative beyond simply telling the truth. When they'd finished, Lovegood had shaken Harry's hand with both of his and said, "Truth is the most dangerous weapon in the world, Lord Potter. Most people are too afraid to use it." Now the truth was out, in a small publication that most of Wizarding Britain considered a joke. But the Quibbler had one advantage the prophet didn't: people who read it were the kind of people who thought for themselves. "That's the defense," Harry said. "What about the attack?" Griphook's grin was sharp. "Rita Skeeter's piece publishes tomorrow." "In which weekly?" "Not the prophet." "Which weekly has a larger readership?" "And Skeeter knows how to target an audience." "The piece focuses on Dumbledore's record, every defense professor who failed, every student injury that went uninvestigated, the financial discrepancies. She's framing it as a human interest story, the school we trusted and the man who failed it. It's devastating. Anything we should worry about?" "Skeeter is Skeeter. She embellishes. She insinuates. But the core facts are accurate, and that's what matters. We can't control every word she writes, but we can make sure the truth is louder than the lies." Harry nodded. He finished his breakfast, wiped his mouth, and stood. "What's on the schedule?" "You have a meeting with the full Board of Governors at 10 o'clock. Dumbledore has filed an appeal against his termination. The board will hear arguments from both sides." "Who's on the board?" Griphook pulled out a list. 12 members. For founder seats, you hold 2, Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw are vacant. 8 appointed seats, Lucius Malfoy, Augusta Longbottom, Griselda Marchbanks, Tiberius Ogden, Knott Sr., Greengrass Sr., Diggory Sr., and a ministry appointee named Dolores Umbridge. "Tell me about Umbridge." "Senior Undersecretary to the Minister for Magic. Fudge's right hand. She's ambitious, vindictive, and despises anything she considers beneath her, which includes goblins, werewolves, centaurs, half-bloods, and children who don't do as they're told." Griphook paused. "She will be your most dangerous opponent on the board. Malfoy is predictable, he operates through money and intimidation. Umbridge operates through bureaucracy. She will bury you in procedure if you let her. Then I won't let her. The Board of Governors met in a chamber at the Ministry, a wood-paneled room with a long rectangular table and portraits of former board members on the walls, most of whom appeared to be sleeping. Harry arrived with grip hook and 2 goblin warriors, and the room fell silent as he entered. The board members were already seated. Harry scanned the table and matched faces to files. Augusta Longbottom gave him a subtle nod. Lucius Malfoy's expression was a careful mask of polite neutrality. A squat woman in a pink cardigan, Umbridge, smiled at Harry with a sweetness so artificial it could have given you cavities. And at the far end of the table, in a visitor's chair, sat Albus Dumbledore. He looked diminished. Not physically, he was still tall, still silver-bearded, still radiating that quiet authority. But something had shifted in the way he held himself. The twinkle was there, but it was effortful, maintained rather than natural. He looked like a man who had spent the night thinking and hadn't liked what he'd found. "Lord Potter," said Griselda Marchbanks, the board's chairperson, an ancient witch who looked like she might have personally taught Dumbledore as a student. "Thank you for attending. We are here to consider the appeal filed by Professor Dumbledore against his termination as headmaster of Hogwarts. Professor Dumbledore, you may present your case." Dumbledore stood. He moved to the head of the table, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet and measured and carried the weight of a century of accumulated trust. "Thank you, Madam Marchbanks. Members of the board. I will be brief." He paused, letting the silence gather. "I have served as headmaster of Hogwarts for nearly 20 years. In that time, I have faced challenges that would have broken lesser institutions, a wizarding war, its aftermath, the constant threat of dark forces seeking to undermine everything we've built. I have not always made the right decisions. I admit that freely. The placement of the Philosopher's Stone within the school was an error of judgment that I deeply regret." He let that land. Several board members shifted in their seats. However, Dumbledore continued, "I believe that my termination by Lord Potter, while legally valid, was premature and driven by incomplete understanding of the threats we face. Lord Potter is 5 years old. He is remarkable, I do not dispute that, but he is a child, and the decisions he is making will have consequences that extend far beyond Hogwarts. I am asking this board not to reverse my termination, but to consider whether the process by which it occurred was in the best interest of the school and its students. It was masterful." Harry had to admit that. Dumbledore wasn't fighting the termination directly, he was questioning the process, which was subtler and harder to counter. He was also positioning himself as the reasonable adult in the room, the voice of experience and caution, implicitly reminding the board that Harry was a child. Furthermore, Dumbledore said, "I must address the matter of security." Lord Potter himself encountered a fragment of Voldemort, gasps around the table, Umbridge's smile freezing, parasitically attached to a member of my staff. This confirms what I have long suspected, Voldemort is not truly dead, and he will return. The decisions made now about Hogwarts leadership will directly affect our ability to respond to that threat. I urge this board to consider carefully whether the disruption of changing leadership at this critical moment is wise. He sat down. The room exhaled. "Lord Potter," Marchbanks said. "Your response." Harry stood. His feet didn't quite touch the floor from the chair, so he slid off it and stood beside the table instead, which meant he was looking up at everyone. He didn't try to compensate for that. He just stood where he was and spoke. "Headmaster Dumbledore calls my understanding incomplete. He's right. I'm 5. There's a lot I don't understand yet." Harry let a beat pass. "But I understand what I saw at Hogwarts. I understand a 3-headed dog behind a first-year lock. I understand a troll in the basement. I understand Voldemort living on the back of a professor's head while students slept 3 floors above." Another beat. "Dumbledore says the stone was an error of judgment. When did he realize it was an error? Before or after I pointed it out?" Silence. He says changing leadership is disruptive. He's right about that too. Disruption is uncomfortable. But do you know what's more uncomfortable? Being a student at a school where the headmaster uses you as a piece in a chess game you don't know you're playing. Harry turned to face the full board. Here's what I can tell you about the last 3 days. Since Professor McGonagall assumed the interim headmistress position, the Philosopher's Stone has been returned to Nicholas Flamel. The Cerberus has been removed. The traps have been dismantled. A team of goblin cursebreakers is arriving next week to address the defense against the Dark Arts curse, a curse that Headmaster Dumbledore allowed to persist for decades. The medical wing is being restocked. The budget is being restructured to prioritize education over, and I'm being polite here, extracurricular strategic operations. He paused. Professor Dumbledore asked whether the disruption of changing leadership is wise. I'd ask a different question. What was the cost of not changing it sooner? The room was very still. Harry could hear the scratch of a quill. Someone was taking notes. Probably Marchbanks. She had that look. If I may, said Umbridge, and her voice was high and girlish and entirely at odds with the calculation in her small eyes. Lord Potter, I think we all appreciate your enthusiasm. It's quite admirable for someone so young. But I do wonder whether the involvement of, how shall I put this, non-human entities in the governance of a wizarding educational institution is entirely appropriate. She glanced at Griphook. The glance was loaded. Goblins, she continued, have their own customs, their own values, their own, forgive me, agenda. I'm sure your goblin advisors have been very helpful, but the question must be asked, who is truly making the decisions here? A 5-year-old child? Or the creatures standing behind him? The word creatures landed like a slap. Griphook's expression didn't change, but Harry saw his hand tighten on the satchel strap. Madam Umbridge, Harry said, and his voice was calm in a way that made several people at the table sit up straighter, because 5-year-olds are not supposed to sound like that, controlled, deliberate, each word chosen and placed. I'm going to give you one chance to rephrase that. Griphook is my advisor, my financial manager, and my friend. He is not a creature. He is a goblin, a citizen of the Goblin Nation, and a representative of Gringotts Bank, which has managed the wealth of Wizarding Britain for 7 centuries. If you'd like to discuss the qualifications of my advisors, I'm happy to do so. If you'd like to engage in bigotry, you can do it somewhere I don't have to listen to it. Umbridge's smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened. I was simply raising a concern that many in the ministry share, then the ministry should examine its concerns. And while it's examining things, it might want to look at the regulatory failures that allowed a known dark wraith to possess a Hogwarts professor for an entire academic year without anyone at the ministry noticing. Harry tilted his head. Where was the ministry oversight, Madam Umbridge? Where were the safety inspections? The staff background checks? You sit on the board of governors. This happened on your watch too. Umbridge's smile finally cracked. Underneath it was something cold and furious and, Harry noted, genuinely dangerous. This was a woman who would not forget this moment. He filed that away. I move to uphold Lord Potter's termination of Headmaster Dumbledore, Augusta Longbottom said from across the table. Her voice was firm and carried easily. The evidence of negligence is clear. The Founders' Charter authority is beyond dispute. And frankly, after what we've heard today, I think the school is better off. Seconded, said Amos Diggory, a broad-shouldered wizard with a kind face and worried eyes. I oppose, said Malfoy, his voice silk over steel. On procedural grounds. A 5-year-old should not have unilateral authority over the premier educational institution in, a 5-year-old doesn't, Harry said. The Founders' Charter does. I'm just the one exercising it. If you have a problem with the charter, take it up with Godric Gryffindor and Salazar Slytherin. I'm sure they'd love to hear your thoughts. Someone, it sounded like Marchbanks, made a noise that was suspiciously close to a snort. The vote was called. Harry didn't get to vote, he held founder seats, which gave him authority over the school but not a standard board vote on appeals. The 8 appointed members decided. Augusta Longbottom, uphold. Amos Diggory, uphold. Griselda Marchbanks, uphold. Tiberius Ogden, after a long, agonizing pause, uphold. Greengrass Sr., reading the room, uphold. Lucius Malfoy, oppose. Not Sr., oppose. Dolores Umbridge, oppose. 5-3. Dumbledore's termination stood. The room exhaled. Dumbledore sat very still in his chair, his hands folded, his expression unreadable. Harry watched him and felt, underneath the political victory, something that wasn't triumph. It was something quieter and sadder. Dumbledore had been a great man once. Maybe he still was. But greatness without accountability was just power, and power without accountability was what had put Harry in a cupboard. The appeal is denied, Marchbanks said. Professor McGonagall's appointment as interim headmistress is confirmed. Lord Potter retains his founder seat authority. This session is adjourned. Chairs scraped. Conversations erupted. Malfoy swept out without a word, his cane clicking on the floor with a fury his face didn't show. Umbridge followed, her pink cardigan a spot of aggressive color in the wood-paneled room. Not Senior. A gaunt, grey man Harry hadn't heard speak once, slipped out through a side door like smoke. Augusta Longbottom paused by Harry's chair and put her hand on his shoulder. Well done, boy. Euphemia would be proud. Thank you, Augusta. Neville's looking forward to Saturday. He's been practicing his handshake. She smiled, a rare, warm thing, and left. Dumbledore rose last. He gathered his robes, straightened his spectacles, and walked to where Harry stood. Griphook tensed. The goblin warriors shifted. Lord Potter, Dumbledore said. I owe you something that I should have given you long ago. Harry waited. An apology. Dumbledore's voice was quiet, stripped of performance, stripped of the grandfatherly warmth and the strategic calculation and all the layers of persona that the man wore like armor. Underneath all of it was just an old man, tired and wrong and trying, perhaps for the first time in decades, to simply be honest. I am sorry for what you suffered at the Dursleys. I am sorry for the choices I made on your behalf without your consent. I am sorry for treating your life as a variable in an equation rather than as. He faltered. Rather than as a life. Harry looked at Albus Dumbledore and saw something he hadn't expected to see, genuine pain. Not the performative kind. The real kind. The kind that comes from looking at what you've done and finally seeing it clearly. Thank you, Harry said. I mean that. I know you do. That's what makes this so difficult. Dumbledore paused. You asked me, at Hogwarts, to come find you when I understood the difference between an ally and a puppet master. I am not there yet. But I am trying. That's a start. May I offer one piece of advice? Not as your former guardian. Not as the former headmaster. Just as an old man who has made more mistakes than you've had birthdays. Go ahead. Be careful of the people who agree with you too easily. Your enemies will oppose you openly, Malfoy, Umbridge, others. They're dangerous, but they're predictable. The truly dangerous ones are those who will tell you exactly what you want to hear and wait for you to let your guard down. Harry considered this. Is that what you did? To the people who trusted you? Dumbledore flinched. Yes, he said. It is. Then I'll keep that in mind. Dumbledore nodded. He extended his hand, long, thin, liver-spotted, bearing the weight of 150 years. Harry shook it. The old man's grip was gentle. Goodbye, Lord Potter. Goodbye, Professor Dumbledore. Harry paused. For what it's worth, I don't think you're a bad man. I think you're a good man who forgot that good intentions aren't the same as good actions. Something moved across Dumbledore's face, a ripple of emotion, quickly controlled. He inclined his head, turned, and walked out of the chamber. Harry watched him go. "That was generous," Griphook said quietly. "It was true," Harry said. "There's a difference." The afternoon was consumed by Rita Skeeter. Not in person, Skeeter's article in Which Weekly dropped at noon, and by 1 o'clock it was all anyone in Wizarding Britain was talking about. She'd done exactly what Griphook had predicted, wrapped the facts in a human interest narrative that was readable, emotional, and absolutely merciless. The Headmaster's Secret, How Albus Dumbledore Failed Hogwarts. The article detailed every defense against the dark arts professor who'd lasted only 1 year. Every student injury that had gone unreported. The financial discrepancies. The Philosopher's Stone. The Cerberus. And, Skeeter's masterstroke, interviews with former students who described the defense classes as a joke, dangerous, and the reason I can't cast a proper shield charm and I'm 26. She'd also, inevitably, embellished. There were insinuations about Dumbledore's personal life that were irrelevant and unkind, and a section implying that Dumbledore had been skimming from the Hogwarts endowment for personal use, which wasn't supported by the evidence. Harry frowned at those parts. "Can we correct the inaccuracies?" he asked Griphook. "We can issue a statement. But any correction will be seen as backing down from the broader narrative. The truth is, Harry, Skeeter's piece is doing exactly what we needed it to do, shifting public opinion. The Prophet's dark goblin influence story is already losing ground. People care more about the defense curse and the Philosopher's Stone than they do about your age. I still don't like the lies. Welcome to politics." Harry wrote a statement anyway. Short, precise, addressed to the public. He acknowledged the factual elements of Skeeter's article, praised her investigative work, and politely noted that certain personal insinuations about Professor Dumbledore were unsupported and beneath the standard of responsible journalism. He sent it to both the Prophet and the Quibbler. The Prophet didn't print it. The Quibbler did. Lovegood also printed an editorial about the integrity of the press, that somehow tied media ethics to the mating habits of crumplehorn snorkaks, but the core message was clear. By evening, the tide had turned. The Prophet's letters page was flooded with responses from parents demanding to know about the defense curse, the stone, the troll in the basement. The ministry was fielding inquiries. Fudge held a press conference in which he attempted to distance himself from Umbridge's comments at the board meeting, which Skeeter had somehow obtained a transcript of. "She's an unregistered animagus," Griphook mentioned casually. "A beetle. She hides on walls during meetings. That's how she gets her information. That's how she gets everything. It's technically illegal. I mention this only as a point of interest. And leverage. And leverage." Harry filed that away too. The game was getting complicated, and he was assembling his pieces carefully. Saturday morning arrived with sunshine, which felt like an omen. Neville Longbottom came to Gringotts at 10 o'clock, escorted by Augusta, who wore her vulture hat and an expression that said she expected great things and would be moderately disappointed if they didn't materialize. Neville was round-faced, nervous, and clutching a potted plant like a lifeline. "Hello," Harry said. "Hello," Neville said. He thrust the plant forward. "I brought you a Mimbulus Mimbletonia. It's a succulent. From Madagascar. It shoots stink sap if you poke it wrong, but it's actually really interesting because the defense mechanism is," he stopped himself, flushing crimson. "Sorry. Gran says I talk about plants too much." "I like plants," Harry said, taking the pot carefully. The Mimbulus Mimbletonia was small, gray-green, and covered in what appeared to be boils. It was, objectively, one of the ugliest things Harry had ever seen. He loved it immediately. "Thank you, Neville. This is brilliant." Neville blinked. "Really? Really? Come on, I'll show you my room. The goblins gave me a whole suite, there's a fireplace and everything." Augusta watched them go with an expression that was trying very hard to be stern and failing badly. They spent the morning together. Harry showed Neville his quarters, the books Griphook had been bringing him, the cloak that made you invisible. Wicked, Neville breathed, watching his hand disappear. Neville showed Harry the correct way to water the Mimbulus Mimbletonia and told him about his parents. They're in St. Mungo's, Neville said, sitting on the floor with his knees pulled up. The long-term ward. They don't recognize me. Mom gives me sweet wrappers sometimes. I keep them all. Harry sat next to him. Not touching, Neville flinched slightly at physical contact, which Harry recognized with a pang, but close. Present. I'm sorry, Harry said. Gran says I should be proud of them. They were heroes. You can be proud and sad at the same time. Those aren't opposites. Neville looked at him. His eyes were wide and brown and swimming with the kind of loneliness that Harry understood in his bones, the specific loneliness of a child who is loved in theory but alone in practice. People say my magic's weak, Neville said quietly. Gran worries. The family worries. I've never done accidental magic. Sometimes I think maybe I'm a squib and they just haven't told me. Harry reached out with his awareness, not the castle's awareness, his own, the magical senses that the lordship had awakened, and felt Neville's magical signature. It was there. Not weak. Not absent. Suppressed. Buried under layers of anxiety and expectation and the crushing weight of living in the shadow of parents who'd been brilliant and a grandmother who demanded brilliance in return. You're not a squib, Harry said. Your magic is there. I can feel it. Neville stared at him. You can. It's strong, Neville. Really strong. It's just, scared. Like it's hiding. Magic can be scared. I think magic reflects who we are. And when someone spends their whole life being told they're not enough, their magic might start believing it. Neville was quiet for a long time. He picked at the hem of his jumper. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. How do you stop it being scared? Harry thought about the cupboard. About the night the windows blew out. About the moment he'd looked at Vernon Dursley and felt the crack in his chest and the light in his hands and the ring appearing on his finger. I think you have to get angry, Harry said. Not angry at other people. Angry at the lie. The lie that you're not enough. You have to look at that lie and decide you don't believe it anymore. He paused. It helps if you have someone who believes in you. I had the ring. And the goblins. He looked at Neville. And now you've got me. Neville's lip trembled. He pressed it flat. We just met. So. I decided Griphook was my friend after about 10 minutes. I'm efficient. Neville almost laughed. It came out as a weird, hiccupy sound, and then his eyes were wet, and then he was crying, not loud, not dramatic, just quiet tears rolling down his round cheeks, and Harry sat next to him and didn't say anything, because sometimes the bravest thing you can do for someone is just be there while they fall apart. When Neville had cried himself out, he wiped his face on his sleeve and said, Sorry. Don't be. I don't usually, Neville. Yeah. Do you want to meet a phoenix? Neville's eyes went wide. A what? Fawkes had taken to visiting Harry at Gringotts, appearing in bursts of flame that made the goblin guards very nervous. The phoenix materialized on command, or perhaps on desire, it was hard to tell with Fawkes, and landed on Harry's outstretched arm, golden and red and radiating warmth. Neville stared. His mouth was open. His eyes were enormous. You can touch him, Harry said. Neville reached out with a trembling hand and stroked the phoenix's breast. Fawkes trilled, a long, sweet, complex note that filled the room like warm water, and Neville's trembling stopped. His shoulders unknotted. His face smoothed. And then something happened that made Harry grin so hard his cheeks hurt, the Mimbulus Mimbletonia on the desk bloomed. Not a subtle bloom. A full, exuberant explosion of color, flowers erupting from every boil, blue and purple and gold, the ugly gray-green plant transforming into something gorgeous and wild and entirely unprecedented. Neville stared at the plant. At his own hands. At Harry. That was you, Neville. But I've never, you just did. Neville looked at his hands as if he'd never seen them before. The tears were back, but different this time, lighter, shocked, the tears of someone who has just discovered that the thing they feared was missing was there all along. I'm not a squib, Neville whispered. You're not a squib, Harry confirmed. And for the record? That was impressive. I don't think Mimbulus Mimbletonia is supposed to do that. It's definitely not supposed to do that. They looked at each other and burst out laughing. Real laughter, the kind that makes your stomach hurt and your eyes stream and leaves you gasping. The phoenix sang. The flowers blazed. Augusta Longbottom, drawn by the noise, appeared in the doorway and stopped dead. She looked at the blooming plant. She looked at her grandson, laughing and crying and surrounded by magic. She looked at Harry Potter. And Augusta Longbottom, who had not cried since the day her son and daughter-in-law were tortured into insanity, pressed her knuckle to her lips and turned away, because some things are too much to witness head-on. The weeks that followed were transformative. Harry established a routine, mornings at Gringotts reviewing accounts and political correspondence, afternoons at Hogwarts working with McGonagall on school reforms, evenings studying, magic, history, law, everything Griphook and his growing circle of advisors could feed him. He was 5, and his schedule would have exhausted a grown wizard, but the lordship magic sustained him. Not endlessly, he still needed sleep, still had moments of bone-deep exhaustion, but the magic was a reservoir he could draw on, and he drew on it freely. The goblin curse-breakers arrived at Hogwarts on a Tuesday. There were 7 of them, led by a scarred, grizzled goblin named Boneclaw who took one look at the defense against the dark arts classroom and spat on the floor. Cursed, Boneclaw said. So level. Tied to the castle wards. Clever. Very old. He ran his fingers along the doorframe. The caster knew Hogwarts. Knew its bones. Voldemort was a student here, Harry said. That explains it. He threaded the curse into the school's own magical structure. Breaking it without damaging the wards is going to be delicate. Boneclaw grinned, showing filed teeth. I love delicate. The curse breaking took 11 days. It was loud, dangerous, and at one point involved an explosion that blew out every window on the 2nd floor. Boneclaw lost an eyebrow. His team didn't sleep. McGonagall organized student evacuations for the worst days, turning it into a learning exercise by having the older students practice protective wards. On the 12th day, Boneclaw walked into the headmistress's office, slammed a chunk of blackened stone onto McGonagall's desk, and said, "Done." McGonagall picked up the stone. It was hot to the touch, shot through with veins of dark magic that were visibly fading. Is this the anchor? The curse used this stone as a focal point. It was buried in the classroom wall. Probably placed there when Riddle was a student, decades before he applied for the teaching position and was turned down. Boneclaw cracked his neck. The curse is broken. You can keep a defense professor for more than a year now. The Goblin Nation has my gratitude, McGonagall said. The Goblin Nation has Lord Potter's gold, Boneclaw replied. Gratitude is nice too, though. The new defense professor was Alastair Moody, retired Auror, legendary dark wizard catcher, owner of a magical eye that could see through walls and a wooden leg that clunked on the stone floors like a metronome. Amelia Bones had recommended him, and Harry had interviewed him personally. I don't coddle students, Moody had said, his magical eye swiveling to examine Harry from multiple angles simultaneously. Good. Neither do I. I teach practical combat. Spells, tactics, situational awareness. None of that textbook nonsense. Even better. I'm told you held Voldemort's wraith in the castle wards. For about 30 seconds. Moody's scarred face split into something that was technically a smile. 30 seconds against the darkest wizard of the century. At age 5. The magical eye fixed on Harry's ring. You'll do, Potter. You'll do. Harry also addressed the house elf situation, which had been bothering him since he'd first visited the kitchens and found 100 small creatures in ragged pillowcases working 18-hour days without pay. They like working, Griphook had said, when Harry expressed concern. People who've never been offered an alternative often think they like the alternative they have. That doesn't mean we shouldn't offer them one. Harry instituted optional wages, optional days off, and mandatory health care for all Hogwarts house elves. The elves were confused by this. Several cried. One, a particularly enthusiastic elf named Dobby who seemed to vibrate at a frequency slightly higher than the others, attached himself to Harry with a devotion that was touching and slightly alarming. Dobby is living to serve the great Harry Potter, sir. Dobby, you don't have to, Harry Potter sir is the greatest wizard in the world and Dobby is so happy to be, Dobby. Sir. Thank you. Dobby burst into tears, which Harry was learning was the elf's default response to kindness. He gave Dobby a handkerchief, one of the monogrammed ones from the Potter vault, and Dobby treasured it like a holy relic. Spring turned toward summer. Harry turned 6. The goblins threw him a birthday party, which was not something goblins typically did and which involved a cake shaped like a dragon and a sparring demonstration that got slightly out of hand. Griphook gave him a goblin-forged dagger, small, balanced for a child's hand, razor-sharp. Every Potter should be able to defend themselves, Griphook said. Even the ones who can hold dark lords in castle wards. Neville came to the party. So did Luna Lovegood, who arrived with her father and spent most of the party talking to one of the goblin warriors about the defensive properties of dirigible plums. Augusta Longbottom came and ate 2 slices of dragon cake and told Griphook that his son had excellent taste in rocks. Amelia Bones came, briefly, between meetings. She brought Harry a book, Practical Defensive Magic and Its Use Against the Dark Arts, and a card that said simply, Happy Birthday, Harry. You're doing well. Harry kept the card on his bedside table. He looked at it before he went to sleep, sometimes, on the hard days. The political landscape was shifting. Dumbledore had retreated from public life, not completely, he still held his Wizengamot seat and his position as Supreme Mugwump, but he'd stepped back from the daily machinations of wizarding politics in a way that surprised everyone who knew him. The few times Harry saw him, at Wizengamot sessions where their paths crossed, Dumbledore was quiet, thoughtful, watching rather than directing. Malfoy was another matter. Lucius had been nursing his grudge like a fine wine, and it was maturing into something potent. He couldn't attack Harry directly, the political cost was too high, the public sympathy too strong, so he worked indirectly. Legislation designed to limit the authority of founder seats. Quiet conversations with ministry officials about oversight and accountability. Funding cuts to the DMLE that just happened to affect Bones' department. Harry countered each move. Not with force, with patience, preparation, and the relentless accumulation of allies. Every family that Harry helped, every injustice he addressed, every reform he implemented at Hogwarts, added another brick to the wall of support that was building around him. The Wizengamot's neutral faction, the families that didn't belong to Dumbledore's camp or Malfoy's, were increasingly gravitating toward Harry, drawn by the simple novelty of a political figure who seemed to mean what he said. You're building a coalition, Griphook observed one evening, reviewing the latest voting tallies. I'm making friends, Harry said. In politics, that's the same thing. Then politics should be more like friendship. Griphook looked at him with that expression Harry had come to know well, the look of a creature who had spent his life surrounded by cynicism and was slowly, reluctantly, learning to believe in something better. It was a Wednesday in late June when Dumbledore came to Gringotts. Harry was in Ragnarok's office, reviewing the quarterly report on the Potter estates, 17 properties across Britain and Europe, most of which had been neglected for years and were being systematically restored by goblin contractors. Griphook was there, and Ragnarok, and a cup of tea that Harry had made himself because the goblin's idea of tea involved a level of bitterness that could strip paint. The door opened. A goblin guard said, "Albus Dumbledore requests an audience with Lord Potter." Harry looked at Griphook. Griphook's eyebrows rose. Harry looked at Ragnarok, who shrugged, a very ungoblin gesture that he'd picked up from spending too much time around Harry. "Send him in," Harry said. Dumbledore entered. He looked different again, not diminished, as he had at the board meeting, but changed. Lighter. As if he'd set something down that he'd been carrying for a long time. His robes were simple, grey, unadorned. His silver hair and beard were neatly trimmed. His eyes, behind the half-moon spectacles, were clear and blue and, for the first time in Harry's experience, completely unguarded. "Lord Potter," Dumbledore said. "Thank you for seeing me. Have a seat, Professor." Dumbledore sat. He looked at Ragnarok and inclined his head. He looked at Griphook and said, "Mr. Griphook, I owe you an apology as well. I have not treated the Goblin Nation with the respect it deserves, and your service to Lord Potter has been exemplary." Griphook blinked. In 5 months of working with Harry, he had heard many things from wizards. An unsolicited apology from the former headmaster of Hogwarts was not one of them. "I will consider your words, Professor," Griphook said, which was Goblin for "I didn't expect that and I need a moment." "I've come to report what I've found," Dumbledore said, turning to Harry. "You told me to come find you when I understood the difference between an ally and a puppet master. I'm not certain I've fully arrived at that understanding, but I've been working on it, and in the process, I've uncovered something that you need to know." "Go on." "Horcruxes." The word fell into the room like a stone into still water. "I've spent the last 3 months researching them. You know the theory, Voldemort split his soul into fragments, each one anchored to a physical object. As long as those objects exist, he cannot truly die. The wraith you encountered at Hogwarts was proof that he persists. I know all this. What you may not know is how many he created." Dumbledore paused. "I believe there are 6. Perhaps 7. I've identified 2 with certainty, a diary that belonged to Tom Riddle as a student, currently in the possession of Lucius Malfoy, and a ring that belonged to his maternal grandfather, hidden in the Gaunt family shack in Little Hangleton." Harry leaned forward. "You've identified them. Have you destroyed them?" "The ring, yes. I destroyed it last week." Dumbledore raised his right hand. The fingers were blackened, withered, as if they'd been burned or cursed. "It was trapped. I was careless. Severus managed to contain the curse to my hand, but it will spread eventually." Harry stared at the blackened hand. "How long?" "A year. Perhaps 2. Severus is managing it, but the curse is ultimately fatal." The room was very quiet. "You destroyed a Horcrux," Harry said slowly. "Alone. Without telling anyone. And you got yourself killed doing it." "Dying," Dumbledore corrected gently. "Not yet killed. And yes. Old habits, it seems, are persistent." Harry stood up from his chair. He walked around the desk to where Dumbledore sat and looked at the old man's hand, the blackened fingers, the curse creeping up toward the wrist. He could feel it with his magical senses, a dark, hungry thing, eating its way through Dumbledore's life force like fire through paper. "Give me your hand," Harry said. "Harry, give me your hand." Dumbledore extended the cursed hand. Harry took it in both of his, small hands, a child's hands, but thrumming with the magic of 4 houses. He closed his eyes and reached for the curse. It was ugly. Vicious. It fought him, snarling, clawing, digging deeper into Dumbledore's flesh. Harry felt the ring flare on his finger, felt the Slytherin magic rise, because this was Slytherin's magic, twisted and darkened, the same bloodline that had produced the curse, and he spoke to it. Not in English. In Parseltongue. The language of Slytherin's heirs. He told it to stop. The curse hesitated. It was like watching a wild animal freeze at the sound of its master's voice. The dark magic in Dumbledore's hand shivered, uncertain, caught between its purpose and the authority of the heir who commanded its bloodline. Harry told it to let go. It fought. It screamed, a silent, magical scream that Harry felt in his bones. But the Slytherin Lordship magic was older and stronger, and it carried the weight of 1,000 years of authority, and Harry was not asking. He was commanding. The curse broke. It peeled away from Dumbledore's hand like a shadow fleeing sunlight, coiling into the air as a wisp of dark smoke that Harry caught with a flick of his will and crushed. The blackened fingers flushed pink. The withered skin smoothed. Life returned in a wave of warmth and color, and Dumbledore gasped, a sharp, involuntary sound, the gasp of a man who has just been pulled back from the edge of a cliff. Harry let go and sat back down. He was breathing hard. The ring dimmed on his finger and then steadied. Dumbledore stared at his hand. He flexed his fingers. They moved easily, painlessly, completely healed. How? Dumbledore whispered. Slytherin's curse. Slytherin's heir. Harry picked up his teacup. His hands were shaking slightly. He took a sip to steady them. The magic recognized my authority. I told it to stop. It stopped. Dumbledore looked at Harry, really looked, not with the assessing gaze of a strategist or the warm twinkle of a performer, but with the naked wonder of a very old man witnessing something impossible. You just saved my life, Dumbledore said. Don't make it weird. Harry set down the teacup. You said there are 6 or 7 Horcruxes. You've destroyed one. Where are the others? The shift, from miraculous healing to strategic planning, without missing a beat, made Ragnarok smile. Griphook was already taking notes. Dumbledore collected himself. The diary is with Malfoy. I believe there are objects associated with the other Hogwarts founders, a cup belonging to Hufflepuff, a locket belonging to Slytherin, possibly the lost diadem of Ravenclaw. And... He hesitated. There is the possibility that you yourself are a Horcrux. The room went very still. The night Voldemort tried to kill you, Dumbledore said quietly, the killing curse rebounded, but a fragment of his soul may have lodged in you. Your scar. Your Parseltongue ability. Your connection to him. Harry touched his scar. The lightning bolt. He'd always felt something behind it, a pressure, a whisper, a coldness at the edge of his awareness. He'd assumed it was the memory of the curse. But if it was more than that? Can it be removed? He asked. I don't know. I have spent months researching the question and I do not have a definitive answer. The conventional methods of Horcrux destruction, basilisk venom, fiend fire, would kill the host. So the plan was. Dumbledore was silent. The plan was for me to die, Harry said. That's why you raised me the way you did. Not to live. To sacrifice myself at the right moment. The words fell into the silence like stones into deep water. Griphook's hand tightened on his quill until it snapped. Ragnarok's expression went flat and cold and ancient. Dumbledore closed his eyes. I considered it, he said. Years ago, when I first suspected what you might be. I considered the possibility that your death might be necessary to destroy Voldemort. It was. His voice broke, very slightly. It was the darkest thought I have ever had. And it was wrong. I know that now. What changed your mind? Dumbledore opened his eyes and looked at Harry. You did. A 5-year-old boy walked into the Wizengamot and told the truth, and the world listened. You were supposed to be a weapon. Instead, you became a person. And I will not, sacrifice a person. Harry held Dumbledore's gaze for a long moment. Then he turned to Ragnarok. Director. Is there a goblin method for removing soul fragments from a living host? Ragnarok steepled his fingers. There are rituals. Ancient. Extremely dangerous. The Goblin Nation has dealt with parasitic soul magic before. It is rarer than you might think, but not unprecedented. The process requires a willing host, a master cursebreaker, and a containment vessel for the removed fragment. Can it be done? It can be attempted. I make no guarantees. The risk to you would be significant. But not certain death. Not certain, no. Then let's do it. Harry looked at Dumbledore. You find the other Horcruxes. Work with Griphook, he'll coordinate resources, intelligence, whatever you need. The diary, the cup, the locket, the diadem. Find them and bring them to Gringotts for destruction. I'll handle the one in my head. You're organizing a Horcrux hunt, Dumbledore said. I'm finishing a war that should have been finished 15 years ago. And I'm doing it my way. No chess games. No sacrificial lambs. We find the pieces of his soul, we destroy them, and when he comes back, if he comes back, we meet him together. Harry paused. As allies. Dumbledore sat very still. The light from the crystal veins in the walls played across his face, illuminating every line, every year, every mistake and every good intention. He looked at Harry Potter, 6 years old, messy-haired, too thin despite the goblin's best efforts, with green eyes that burned with a conviction that most adults never achieved. As allies, Dumbledore said. Yes. He extended his healed hand. Harry shook it. The ring pulsed once, warm and steady, and something in the room shifted, a realignment, a settling, as if the universe had been holding its breath and was finally exhaling. Griphook broke the moment. I'll draw up the operational framework. We'll need a secure communication method, a budget allocation, and, Director Ragnarok, the name of your best Horcrux extraction specialist. Boneclaw, Ragnarok said. He's still at Hogwarts. Perfect. He already knows the castle. Harry leaned back in his chair. The exhaustion was hitting now, the deep, bone-level tiredness of channeling ancient magic to heal a dying man. His eyelids were heavy. His hands had stopped shaking but his fingers tingled. Get some rest, Harry, Dumbledore said gently, standing. I will. Harry looked up at him. Professor? Yes. When we've finished this, when the Horcruxes are gone and Voldemort is dealt with, I'm going to need a defense against the dark arts professor who actually knows what they're talking about. Moody's good, but he's not permanent. He told me last week that he plans to retire again once the school year ends. Dumbledore blinked. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you a chance to do what you should have been doing all along. Teaching. Not running the world. Not moving pieces on a board. Just, teaching kids how to protect themselves. Dumbledore stared at him for a long, trembling moment. And then Albus Dumbledore, former headmaster, former chief warlock, the most powerful wizard alive, smiled, a real smile, unguarded, stripped of performance and agenda, the smile of a man who has just been shown a version of himself that he'd forgotten was possible. I would like that very much, Harry, he said. Good. Now go find those Horcruxes. Dumbledore left. The door closed. The office settled into quiet. You just healed him, recruited him, and put him on a leash, all in one conversation, Griphook said. I made a friend, Harry said. In politics, I know. Same thing. Harry yawned. I'm going to sleep for about 100 years. You have a meeting with the Hogwarts Student Council at 9 tomorrow. 99 years, then. He made it to his quarters on autopilot. The bed caught him like a cloud. Fawkes appeared in a burst of flame and settled on the bedpost, singing softly, a lullaby of fire and gold. Harry lay in the warm dark and thought about the year. A cupboard. A ring. A bank full of goblins who became his family. A political body that learned to listen to a child. A school that recognized its heir. A phoenix that chose him. A friend who bloomed a flower. A headmaster who fell and got back up. A Dark Lord who wasn't dead yet but would be, soon, because Harry Potter had decided it, and Harry Potter did not make idle decisions. He was 6 years old. He had the power of 4 ancient houses and the loyalty of goblins and the love of a growing, improbable family of people who had come together around him like iron filings around a magnet. He was not naive. He knew the road ahead was long and dangerous and that people would try to stop him and that Voldemort was out there, diminished but persistent, waiting. He knew that Malfoy was scheming and Umbridge was plotting and the Ministry was a tangle of bureaucracy and cowardice that would take years to reform. He knew that he was a child in a world of adults and that his power, no matter how vast, could not protect him from everything. But he also knew this: he was not alone. He had never, since that first night at Gringotts, been alone. And that made all the difference. The ring glowed softly on his hand. 4 houses. 4 founders. 1,000 years of magic, entrusted to a boy who had started with nothing and was building something that might, if he was brave enough and good enough and stubborn enough, last just as long. "Good night," he whispered to the ring, to the phoenix, to the deep stone halls of Gringotts, to the castle in Scotland that hummed in his awareness like a second heartbeat. The ring pulsed. "Good night, Harry." He slept, and the world turned, and in the morning there would be more to do, always more, an endless cascade of problems and possibilities and the bright, terrifying responsibility of being who he was. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, he was warm. He was safe. He was home. And nobody, not Voldemort, not Malfoy, not the Ministry, not the darkness itself, was ever going to take that from him. Not while he drew breath. Not while the lion and the serpent ran together through the fields of his dreams, golden and silver and fierce and free and his. Always his.